Okay. I'd like to call to order the Board of Supervisors work session on our zoning ordinance rewrite for this October 7th, 2019. I'm going to expedite this.
Yeah.
December. October 7th, 2019, 3 p.m. Before we start, I'd like to give a shout out to Ms. Lascolette, who is at home recovering from eye surgery. Hey, Susan. Okay, she's probably watching.
She just had surgery.
Yeah. Well, she's probably watching with one eye.
She's listening.
She's listening.
She said she was doing very well, so hopefully everything will turn out just fine.
Good.
So we're ready to start. Joanne, you want to take us off?
Yes, thank you again for your extra time for this project. So today, you've seen the rewrite in several different groupings and sections. Today, I want to just roll through everything, each section that goes in the same order as in your packet, and just talk about the very high-level changes to each section. As you know, that there's been lots of other wordsmithing changes, clarifications. It would be too much if we went into all of those, so I'm just going to highlight the high-level changes. And when something's different or was a decision point from when we met with the Joint Planning Commission and Board, I will point that out as we get to that. So again, you know, we show you this slide every time. You're probably sick of seeing it, but you know, the purpose, we just like to remind everybody, is to modernize, simplify, and clarify the ordinance. We're doing it because our code is 50 years old, and we've had lots more zoning ordinance amendments through the years. So we are creating a more usable document. You can see as you look at it, we're using lots more charts and diagrams, codifying existing procedures, reformat it, number the whole document. So now I'm going to start with the different sections. The first section in general provisions, we talked about the purpose, what was the purpose of the zoning ordinance, and we had some things listed. And you know, the purpose is important because we always have to remember why we're doing something. So we did add 5 things to the purpose, which included protecting historic areas, implementing the comprehensive plan, reducing street congestion, facilitating adequate public facilities, and protecting water. So those were at the Joint Planning Commission Board meeting. We gave you a list, and these were ones that were not in our list, that were in other localities, so we added those. Also in the administration and enforcement check section, we codified the pre-application process. We indicated that building permits are required in accordance with the Uniform Statewide Building Code. We clarified when certificates of zoning compliance permits were required. We clarified that it includes accessory structures that do not require a building permit, and farm structures all require zoning compliance. Another thing we did in the enforcement section is we removed the requirement for written complaints. Right now, we are a complaint-based zoning violations. If someone, right now the code requires you to submit a letter in writing. So many people want a phone call in or an email. We are, with this change, we would be able to take those as complaints also, and we would enter that information in the zoning enforcement tracking system, just like we do when we get a letter.
Thank you.
Sure.
I won't do this too often, but I just have a question on enforcement in the next section, penalties for violation, 1551 and 1552. So thank you for clarifying. I had that note. The way it reads, any person may make a complaint, but the way I read the section, and I don't remember how it was before, you're saying that the zoning administrator or anybody on their own volition can initiate. We're not solely complaint-based, right?
Unless it's like a CUP condition or a proffered condition, we would inspect those and make sure they're in compliance, but other than that, we are solely complaint-based.
But that's not codified, that's a policy. So there's nothing in the code that says how we receive complaints, but there's nothing in there that says we can take action only upon a complaint.
And when you say code, you mean ordinance or ordinance?
County code, that's right,
County code.
ordinance. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay, so penalties for violations. I see, the only thing I saw skimming, and I tried to do a global search, it looks like violation is a misdemeanor, punishable by a fine of not more than $1,000.
Yes, and that's significantly more than is in the current code. We talked about that, I wanna say maybe 8 months ago, but I asked to have higher authority,
Cool.
consistent with state law.
Yeah, okay. So, and this is a question probably for Tara, but when I read the code, and there's been some changes that take effect October 1st of this year, so and I'm not sure, but our civil penalties, it looks like in 15.2.2209 of the Virginia Code, there can be civil penalties. It says notwithstanding subdivision A5 of 15.2286, any locality may adopt an ordinance which establishes a uniform schedule of civil penalties for violations of specified provisions of the zoning ordinance. And so it goes through and it talks about, you have to put a schedule together. Is there any reason why we may not want to consider a civil penalty structure instead of going right to a misdemeanor criminal charge as being our only option?
Two thoughts. One is in terms of actual enforcement actions beyond what the zoning inspector is able to do himself with letters. By being able to take it into criminal court, you get into court faster, and you're eligible to have the court order them to abate it. In other words, they have to, they may or may not find them, but they have to clean it up. I don't believe that authority is similarly available in civil. But again, this has not been a global change of the ordinance. This has been updated, keep it consistent with what's there. So that wasn't looked at. Hey, do we want to do criminal or civil? That being said, I think you can only do civil or criminal. I don't believe you have the authority, and I haven't looked at it in a while, to say, well, we'll decide that day whether we want to charge you civilly or criminally.
And that was the caution here. I'll read the sentence I think you're thinking of. It says designation of a particular zoning ordinance violation for a civil penalty pursuant to this section shall be in lieu of criminal sanctions. And except for any violation resulting in injury to persons, such designation shall preclude the prosecution of a violation as a criminal misdemeanor, provided, however, that when such civil penalties total 5,000 or more, the violation may be prosecuted as a criminal misdemeanor. So it looks like, I think you can kind of get to your criminal point if somebody keeps violating under the civil.
Right. And of course, our number one goal to date, it's just been a policy, has been, we don't really want to collect people's money at all. What we want them to do is to clean it up. And so
in other words,
there's a threat of a criminal prosecution. Criminal prosecutions to date have resulted in dismissals because the people clean them up. But if they didn't, should we come to that point, then the criminal court has the authority to order that they be cleaned up. Civilly, I don't believe general district court has that authority. You have to go to circuit court to get that.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I'm enjoying this discussion. I want to come at it from a different angle, perhaps. This is enforcement. For folks that are charged with responsibility of enforcement, do you have historically, have you had any difficulty getting people to comply, given the current tools that we have in the?
No, it's been working fairly well.
Because certainly if what we have wasn't enough and it wasn't working and people weren't paying attention, it wasn't enough to get their attention, then maybe we talk about escalating or this and that. But if it seems to be working generally, then I don't know that there's a reason to dramatically change what we have here, if the tools are sufficient for the folks that have to actually enforce it. That's my thought. Thank you.
Can a general district court order an abatement?
I don't believe they can. When I have needed to abate, for instance, I've got a property, junkyard property, and it's in circuit court, because circuit court is the only one that had affirmative injunctive powers. Although general district court I know can order an abatement, but I haven't done a specific research other than for 20 years if I need an injunction then go to circuit court. But an abatement, I've always done in general district court.
That was just a thought.
Okay, we'll move on. So then we're gonna move into the zoning districts now. In terms of all the zoning districts, we did, delete 2 zoning districts that had never been used, and we did not see, any benefit to anybody rezoning to those districts. That's the Forestal Conservation District and the Planned Office Park District, so we would be recommending deletion of both of those. And this was one of our decision points when we met with the Planning Commission and the board. There was a provision in the existing code that if you wanted a use that's not listed in the code, you could ask for a CUP for it. We have deleted that provision. If someone wants to bring a specific use in that we don't have, they could request an ordinance amendment. Staff could research it, benchmark it, and recommend what districts we think it should be in. And we felt like that's just a little more transparent. We have always said that if it's not listed in there, it can't be done, but then somebody could ask for a CUP for it, so it's sort of confusing. But, so I think your recommendation at the joint session was to remove that, and we've done that. To all the zoning districts, we've revised and shortened the statement of intent. We've tied the statement of intent to the comprehensive plan. We put permitted and CUP uses in one chart in alphabetical order, and in some of the districts, they're broken down into categories. We put all the bulk regulations into a single chart, and we removed primary and secondary roads and used the same road terms that are in the major thoroughfare plan. What this basically has done is each zoning district used to be about 8 pages long, and with the charts and graphs, it took it to about 3 pages each. So same information, just in a much more condensed format. So at the joint work session, we did have a decision point for the Board of Supervisors, and that was dealing with accessory apartments. And I just want to clarify and make sure we are clear of what would occur if we've done what we thought was recommended at that meeting. So our existing code, we allow an attached in-law suite or a detached single-family residence on the same property with a CUP. During that meeting, we talked about adding all accessory apartments attached or detached as a by right use with development standards in the following districts. So almost all the ag and R districts, but we did not put it in the RPUD because those lots are too small. So the standards that we have is that you could have 1 dwelling unit per parcel, so 1 additional. So the way it was written right now is in all of those districts, you can either have an attached in-law suite or a detached second unit. It can only be used by persons who are related to those in the principal dwelling. It could not be rented. A working smoke detector and carbon monoxide monitor is required. Have to provide emergency vehicle access. And prior to the establishment of it or the transfer, they would have to notify the county that it's occurring, so that it's sort of like a registration, so we know that it's there. And then if they can't meet these requirements, they can ask for a CUP. And in staff's discussions, staff was concerned that perhaps there might be some unintended consequences by allowing a second dwelling unit on every property. So we did benchmark some of our surrounding localities to see how they treat accessory apartments. People call them different things: guest houses, in-law suites. So in all of them except for Powhatan do not allow rental. In Chesterfield County, they're a CUP, and they're only supported if it's for a family member and they place deed restrictions on the property. Hanover, it's a CUP, and they have to renew that CUP every 3 years so they can verify that it's still being utilized by a family member. The owner must live in the main house. The attached unit can be no more than 25% square footage of the main house and 2 bedrooms maximum. They have a guest house by right, which is has a guest house can have a kitchen in it, but they can be occupied no more than 90 days a year, and they must provide the county with a signed affidavit, Henrico allows what they call a guest house, but no kitchen is allowed in there, and it can only be used 30 days or less at a time, also providing a signed affidavit to the county. New Kent does allow in-law suites by right, so it has to be attached to the home, and it can't exceed more than 25% of the square footage of the main house. And then Powhatan, you can rent it if the owner lives on site. In ag districts, it's permitted by right. If it's attached, it can be no more than 35% square footage of the main house. If it's detached, no more than 50%. If you'd like something larger, you can request a cup. And then in their residential districts, they're allowed by right, but only if it's density neutral. So if the property, say in some of their districts, if it's a 10-acre property, minimum lot size, if they have a 20-acre parcel, then they can have that second dwelling unit, or if they have 30, they can have 3. But if you wouldn't be able to have it unless it was density neutral. So after looking at this and thinking about some of the repercussions, staff's recommendation is to have attached in-law suites, if it's attached to the main dwelling, to be by right in agricultural and residential districts with the development standards that I had presented there, with an additional one saying no more than 25% square footage of the existing home. But we really think that the second detached dwellings should be a CUP use and not a by right use. I think we could run into some concerns later about density being a lot higher in certain areas than we anticipated, lots of rentals, hard to enforce and hard to keep track of. So this is a board decision. We made a decision, and just then there's a reciprocal effects to everything. So as we went with that decision, we were then seeing how it impacted other sections of the ordinance, and it sort of raised some red flags. I'd like to get some thoughts.
Can you, before we get into that, could you just clarify for me very quickly, a primary residence, by right, who can live there?
We don't.
A family which is relatively undefined, and up to 4 unrelated people.
Okay, so how many generations of related family blood relations can live in one residence?
Under the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, we're not allowed to declare.
So how does in-law come in? If it's part of one spouse's family?
In-law's just a descriptor. It is a second dwelling. So for instance, Mr. Alvarez has his mother-in-law living with him. To my knowledge, and I could be completely wrong, he doesn't have a separate dwelling space in which she is residing.
She's living in
But from a
attached.
zoning.
She's in a room,
It's
and she
attached.
uses our kitchen. And
Right, so that's just
Oh,
occupants
right.
of a house.
From a zoning perspective, the second dwelling occurs when there's a second kitchen. So you can have a pool house that has a shower, a toilet facility, microwave, all of that. But when you put that stove or range in there, that classifies it as the second kitchen.
So none of our residences are allowed to have a second kitchen?
That's correct, unless you have permission to have two.
Only with a CUP.
To have a second kitchen?
Yes.
Okay.
There has to be a way to define what's just a lot of rooms in a house and what's an additional dwelling within the house.
Does Dover Hall just have one kitchen, or, I'm trying to think
They
of
don't
some
have a
instances.
separate suite where someone has a bedroom and a kitchen to their own use. So for instance, in a suite hotel that you stay at, there typically is no oven, no range. And that prevents that suite hotel from having individual dwelling units, even though many of them now have sink and a refrigerator and a microwave.
And these in-law suites typically have a separate address and everything.
Huh.
See, that's what I'm trying to get at, is what's the distinction between a multi-generational family living in a primary residence with a couple of bedrooms over the garage and 3 or 4 generations living together versus, I mean, and a lot of times there's separate access, you know, stairs up to the apartment over the garage.
And we would not want to discourage that occurring. It's when
Yeah.
you have a separate enclosed unit that has a full kitchen.
And to be
Yeah, different.
precise,
Otherwise, they don't have a separate kitchen.
you know, the distinction
Yeah, that's
is
correct.
a second dwelling attached. So 2 dwellings in one structure and a second dwelling detached. That's really the 2 distinctions.
So an attached second dwelling is one with a separate door, or, I mean, how do you?
Kitchen.
what's
It's
it-
a kitchen.
Kitchen.
It's
So the
basically,
So it could be one residence with one door.
Yes.
If it has 2 kitchens, then it's defined as a separate attached dwelling.
there's one in my neighborhood that was built, has a second entrance, looks just like the front entrance, so it looks like,
Yeah.
almost like a townhome, but they didn't put in a kitchen, so they didn't need a CUP. Mother-in-law moved in, she has her own door, still one address though. But there are several in my neighborhood. 2 were approved last year. 2 in my neighborhood were approved last year. One is an addition to is connected to the house, it's being built right now. And it looks, to me, it almost looks like the size of the house. But the other one is separate, it's at the end of the driveway, it's a small little house. Both came through for a CUP, we approved them both.
Yeah, no, Cobblestone had a separate dwelling, there was a kitchen in there, so they
Right.
had to have a separate community hearing and all that.
Yeah. I guess the question is, let's say I do this and I build a house for my mother-in-law or my mother, whatever, and in a few years I sell my house. What do the new owners have to do?
Based on this, you'd have to contact the county prior to establishing it and when you sold it, and then we would notify the new owner of what the conditions are.
And if I don't notify the county, is it just then somebody needs to call a violation in?
Well,
Assuming they're even using it that
I
way.
mean, cause I may move to, you know,
Perish the thought.
Florida, the villages.
I mean, if we're having trouble with this, I can just imagine what citizens that aren't paying attention.
Right.
So this is really an accessory kitchen, not an accessory apartment.
I mean, not necessarily, again, it is
Because
the.
an apartment without a kitchen is not an accessory
True,
apartment.
but I don't know, if you have an upstairs, I
I'm
won't
trying to-
speak on behalf of enforcement, but the idea is you can make, do you have 2 dwelling units?
Mhm.
And when you look at whether or not you have 2 dwelling units, you look at whether the rooms are arranged such that there is a separate area that contains bathroom, bedroom, and a kitchen. And if all those things are in an area that's designed to be separate, then that's gonna look like a second dwelling unit.
And necessarily a second address?
No, it's not required.
Maybe just under one roof, people living together under one roof.
Right.
And immediate family or extended family.
so we
Yes, yeah.
define accessory apartment as an independent dwelling unit that has been added onto or created within a single-family dwelling.
So I don't think every
Added.
kitchen in a house, that every house that has 2 kitchens would necessarily come to the conclusion. Suppose you have a basement, you know, kitchen rooms down there, but there's no bedroom, okay? And then you also have a first floor kitchen. I don't know that we would look at that and decide there are 2 separate dwelling units. It is, as she described it, the entire view have you created a second dwelling unit within? And typically, you can have bedrooms with bathrooms and seating areas and microwaves and sinks, and that's still not gonna create a separate dwelling area. It is a bigger test than just are there two kitchens in the structure.
And what this is proposing is those, that if it's attached to the house and someone's living in there and you're only have it for relatives, we don't care. I mean, we care enough to get you registered, but it's a by right use. But you want every property to be able to build a second dwelling unit, detached. That's the question.
Right. With a kitchen, because, let me ask you a different way, if you build 3 garages with apartments over each one of them, as long as there's no kitchens, then there's only one kitchen in the main unit, then those are not accessory apartments. Those are, I mean, our first 3 words were, clarify, make it easy to understand, user friendly, all that stuff. And what I'm trying to get at is, so that everybody knows what the rules are and it's easily understood and.
Right, and we would make that all clear once we know what direction we go with the board, and we would provide definitions and what clarifies all that, but I don't know which the board told us to do it, all of them, and I just wanted to make sure you understood what those repercussions were.
I think to me the biggest thing is we always approve them we always say family, but family changes. People pass away, and so how do we regulate it after people sell their house, somebody else comes in, maybe they have a maid and the maid lives in that room, is that an issue or is that considered family? That's why I was thinking that maybe we should just forget about it. Second kitchen, whatever. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it shouldn't matter. We know more people are trying to use that alternative kind of housing, so they don't have to put the parents in a home, that they can be close by.
Yeah.
The distinction you made is what we probably hear the most. People are worried that it's not just the family member today, it's the unrelated person tomorrow where the concern comes up. And I think some of that language on the turnover addresses that, but we may not even know it exists.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I share that concern if it's a rental unit or if it's unrelated, not family related. It's just, having second or third homes, fly under the radar. I share the concern. But if your grandparents move in, I don't want that to, make you a criminal. I mean, because things are changing, the way people live, the way that, you take care of the elderly and all, and I just don't want to make criminals out of people because they had somebody move in over the garage. But
We know, how does it work? I know that there are some farms here in Goochland that have multiple buildings where people live. How does that work?
Well, we have a section where you can have farm workers on ag, and there's some standards, but I think for every 100 acres, you can have 4 farm workers on the property and all, but that has some specific standards that goes with it.
And do we know that in those houses our farm workers are living there?
I know of one situation, and we did go out, we received complaints, and we did go out and check and verify employment.
I mean, Mr. Chair, we call it an in-law suite, but it doesn't have to be your in-laws, right? I mean, we're talking about a second dwelling. Is that
We're actually calling it an accessory apartment is what it is in our thing, so.
All right, so let me ask a question. I want to make sure I understand what an accessory apartment is. That might be a starting point. And the definition that we have in this document, under Article 31, an independent dwelling unit that has been added onto or created within and is accessory to a single-family dwelling. Right away, the lawyer in me says we're using a word to define the word. Accessory apartment is accessory to, so what is, because I see up there attached, but then I see added onto or created within. So what exactly are we talking about, we're trying to govern?
Adding on to or create it within?
Adding onto an existing
That
building.
would be an accessory apartment attached. And then based on discussions from the follow-up last time, the board provided us direction to have accessory apartment attached and detached as by right uses with the CUP.
And
If
so-
you guys are comfortable with that, we can.
So what is a detached, what are the requirements to have a detached unit?
Detached, there are no standards. You get a building permit for a structure. And you have these standards, but it would be much harder to regulate. We went with the same approach that we did with short-term rentals. So right now, you could do a short-term rental in your house by right, but we had said, but if you're gonna do it in a building that's separate, or if you're not gonna live there, then it should be a CUP so we can have some oversight. So it's the same sort of concept with the, as short-term rentals.
So a detached accessory apartment would be any building that is separate. It's on the same parcel, I suppose,
Mhm.
of the single-family dwelling, but it's not attached, it's separate. And then I guess is the definition, it has a kitchen in it? Is that what's going to make it a dwelling unit?
Well, it's, again, yes. I mean, it's not gonna say a kitchen, it's gonna have, in essence, and I can see what you're looking at in the definitions here for accessory apartment, but that concept is, you know, not, gee, there's a kitchen, it's, are the rooms,
Well, if I'm gonna do this, I wanna know, to your point, like, give me some clarity, what can I build, what
okay,
can't I build?
so a dwelling is any structure which is designed for residential purposes. And then when you go over, in a dwelling unit, one or more rooms in a dwelling designed for living or sleeping purposes and having at least one kitchen, a room that has a stove range and or electric or gas hookup for a stove range. So that is what a dwelling unit is.
So there's a dwelling unit, so it does have to have a kitchen, it has to have for it to be cause an
And
accessory
having a-
apartment is an independent dwelling unit,
Yes.
so dwelling unit defined means we have to have living space and a kitchen with a hookup for a kitchen.
Right.
Because I remember, don't wanna go off track, but I remember dealing with this in Hanover one time, and they just told me, if you just kill the wire to the oven, then we won't count it anymore.
Yes.
So I just had to have an electrician come in and pull the wire to the stove, and then it was no longer a dwelling.
Exactly.
So that is good, that's clarity.
And that's very consistent for how.
That's not a Goochland standard, that's a zoning standard
So
nationwide.
if I have bedrooms upstairs, if I put a kitchen upstairs, I said now a second domicile,
It's a dwelling unit.
Dwelling unit.
second dwelling unit.
It's an accessory
So I have to get a
dwelling
CUP.
That's what we're
I
debating.
mean, I'm just adding a stove to be able to cook, turkey while we cook chicken downstairs.
Then, do you need a CUP or not, sir?
Right.
I think,
Is it an accessory dwelling unit?
I think the board sees what comes forward for these accessory apartments, right? I mean, we've had probably 8 or 9, we're not arguing whether someone's got a game room and they have a kitchen. They are creating an independent living unit, right? I mean,
Within their house.
I'm not sure why there's so much confusion, because we know, we see what they are. We're not trying to create an extra layer, in fact, we're trying to loosen the standards and say, if you want to create a second dwelling unit, and have a separate independent unit in your home, as a portion of your home, you can do it by right with these standards. However, if you want to build a second dwelling unit, we're recommending that it's a CUP. If the board's comfortable with both of them being by right, that's how the ordinance is right now, because that was what we did based on your last standards. If you guys are fine with it, then staff can move on. I mean, there was some current concerns.
I just wonder, do we?
I think enforcement would be difficult in
Yeah.
the future. What happens once that person dies, they've got a second house on their property, what do you mean I can't rent it?
Yes, you're talking about second, detached.
Detached.
A detached.
That has everything that the primary has. It
Yeah,
has
that's
a kitchen,
right.
a bedroom, a bathroom, it's a
Right.
second.
Right.
in all respects is a second dwelling unit because it's a separate unit. I get that distinction, and yes, I agree, and yes, it could be my family moved in and then the next buyer says, okay, I don't need that one, I'll just rent it out. That would require a CUP, but if you got in-laws living in it and a second or third generation living in it, grandparents, whatever, I mean, what? We've gone through that low impact versus high impact. If it's just a family member moving in for 6 months while they're sick, we don't want to criminalize them. It's low impact. We say yes all the time anyway, so why are we going through all that? But if it's renting out to a separate dwelling, I get that too. So I just, when you talk about independent dwelling unit inside a primary residence, what makes it independent? All the bedrooms are independent, they're individual, but what makes, so I just.
Kitchen.
Well, the rooms arranged in such a way that a person can live there independently without having to interact with the whole rest of the house.
So that would be the guest area, when guests come over, the guest suite, whatever.
If you have kitchen,
You have a kitchen, your guest suite.
If you share a door, is that then one residence?
no, it could be two. If you have a separate area in that unit where someone could live.
See, I mean, I think it'd be easy in my house. I have a pool table up there, so I could say it's my game room. And I could put a stove up there, I have bathrooms. I have everything that would make 2 bedrooms actually. So they would just have to come down and go out the front door, and which is the same front door I have. So
And that type of arrangement is what Joanne is saying she recommends keep
Keep it.
to be by right. But in terms of the construction of a separate structure to be occupied by those same family members, maybe we should take a look at that through a CUP. Because otherwise people could be out there building second structures, second houses on their property, and we'll have no idea.
And you asked why a moment ago, why people go through it. I think the reason to do so would be so that we have a record of it existing. That's probably the only reason to do so. Because otherwise, if we don't, then we have no record, so then it becomes impossible to enforce. So do we want to prevent what we're talking about preventing? We have to have a process for detached independent dwelling units. Need to go through the process if we want to keep it from just being like, it's another house, I'm gonna rent it.
Right, I think we're getting closer. So if you've got a house that is built, and then you build another wing with a kitchen, bedroom, bathroom for independent living, or build a detached building with a bedroom, bathroom, and kitchen, built for the purpose of having a separate dwelling unit, that's one thing. If you build the original construction, the original home, and there's a finished walkout basement and a pool, and in that basement they have bedroom, bathroom, and kitchen, in that original setup, it's not designed for a second family to live there or anything, it's just designed for entertainment. Then, so it's not being added on, so I think we're getting closer. So adding on to a structure for the purpose of creating a separate dwelling unit with a kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom, either it's attached or detached, then we're getting closer to saying, okay, this is an additive use, it's not the primary use, because there are a lot of folks with finished basements, pools, and pool houses that have food and entertainment down at that level. They just don't want to go back up to the main kitchen to entertain. So it's not a theoretical, it's an actual kind of setup. So I think we're getting closer.
Under that scenario, though, I think the benefit of having it as a CUP, there are folks that buy homes just like that may have been created or added on over time, that they then decide, okay, now I got either an in-law suite that I can rent out, or I'm going to rent it out for supplemental income. I think that's when you wanted to trigger some process.
Yeah, rental units, additions, separate or detached or attached for the purpose of creating a separate dwelling unit, rental units, non-family members. These are all. It's real easy to either a family member you're not, or you build a detached with a kitchen or not. I mean, these are bright lines that you can say yes or no.
So the only way to establish that, though, is to go through the CUP process. It seems to me. Because it's through the CUP process that those restrictions are placed on it, and so somebody comes along to buy it, the obligation of the seller is to say, hey, you know, these are the restrictions that I have on this additional building you see over here that we have.
But Joanne, your recommendation is to have this in the ordinance except for it stops at attached.
This is in the ordinance right now. This is based on the board decision at the joint work session. My recommendation is to continue to allow it as this is for the attached with these standards. But if someone's going to build a detached structure, it would get a CUP. But if the board is comfortable with these standards, we will be getting, you know, they would have to let us know before the establishment or before they transfer it. So we would have some records.
So you're suggesting, I know you made it clear at the board decision, but development standards for accessory apartments - attached and delete or detached, right?
Yes.
Detached, get a CUP.
Accessory apartments that are detached, and we're clear about, you know, CUP only in or CUP in agricultural and residential. That would be everywhere, right? Just a CUP period.
An agricultural and residential district.
There's no other place you can put a detached dwelling, is there?
Well, we were not recommending it for the RPUD district.
So the recommendation is add development standards and the addition can't be more than 25% of the original footprint, is that? Okay, could you go back one slide, please, real quick? Well, there you go. This is, you mentioned this is it's not what's in the zoning.
It's
now.
not what's, this is what's in your packet based on our last discussions.
So this would be for a second kitchen, bedroom and bathroom in the original dwelling unit, but it would be defined as a second, one additional, even though it's within the original.
Yes.
You're
So we
creating-
get back to my scenario where you've got a finished walkout basement with a kitchen in it to serve the pool food. That would be an additional dwelling unit, but it's permitted by right.
It would only be an additional dwelling unit if you had a stove or cooktop.
Yes, and then only family members resided in that bedroom and you didn't rent it out and all of that. So it kind of, it blesses that second kitchen within the same roof, family members only, not
Yes.
rented out.
Yes.
Okay, so that's, I mean, it gets to a lot of what I was talking about before, which is good. And then I guess on the detached, that's, if you're gonna build a separate detached house, then that probably ought to come through a CUP, just so we know it's there.
So let me ask, if we remove or detached to that, 2 or 3 questions. First question, the development standards are gonna be enforced how? I assume through the building permit process?
And that they would be required to let us know when they were establishing one.
But it's by right.
But we would get it through the building
But-
permit.
Yeah, it has to be, there has to be an interaction, there has to be some reason to interact with the county for them to even know about this.
Yes.
So the building permit process would be the trigger. So then, all right, got that. And again, that's assuming we remove or detach, so we're talking about that. How are you going to enforce number 2 and number 2 and number 3 up there?
They would have to let us know.
It's solely
Solely through
solely
complaint.
complaint-based, because I
Yeah.
mean, they could sell, because the buyer's not gonna be put on notice, are they?
They're supposed to
Buyers
through
will,
this
because
process.
if you see under number,
6B,
6,
But
The
this
new-
is a buy right, and the only, so our,
most people, okay, well, understand our citizens don't sit around and read our zoning code, but most people have a little question in the back of their mind before they form an entirely separate living unit in their house. Not all, but most.
I see somebody buying a house and not, and we talked about this when we talked about putting notices in the deeds and things, requiring that as part of the proffers. And I mean, if it's just a building permit process and then we say, oh, hey, by the way, this is great, you can do it by right, but here's some rules. And then, oh, okay, I got it, you know, and then they go on. They're never gonna, how is a buyer, how are we putting a buyer on notice that they can't use that basement, walkout basement to rent, to pick up some extra income?
Well, it is required to send the notice right there in 6.
It's on the, but the burden is on the seller.
Yes.
I just think we're just doing that, is just inviting buyers to get trapped.
Yeah, the buyer may buy it without the seller giving
Because
notice.
we're always
'cause
talking,
the
we're always
seller
talking
may
about,
not
I mean,
know.
great
Someone
buyer
may not know.
beware, but I think,
Yeah.
you know, when I'm passing something like this, I like putting some teeth, or having some teeth in the requirement that the seller, pass this notice on, because if we just hand them, hey, when you get your building permit, here are the rules. I see a buyer getting burned, and we're just opening it up.
We talk about a buyer that would buy it and go, oh, good, there's a second,
Oh, great,
a
yeah,
second dwelling here, and I can
there's a
rent that out for
downstairs, I don't
money.
need that, that's great, it's renting it out.
Then if the seller doesn't tell them otherwise and collects the money, rides off in the sunset.
So you'd rather keep both of them as a CUP?
Even as
I
a
just wanna make
CUP,
sure
you're
that
not
there's some
contained in title.
mechanism, I just wanna make sure there's some mechanism, to put a buyer on. And what I like about the CUP process is, you know, it's clear, because doesn't the CUP get attached to the land? And it's a little easier for a buyer doing due diligence to find the CUP restriction than it is to just rely on the seller telling them, oh, by the way, when I got that building permit 10 years ago, they gave me some written rules, and here they are.
Right, I mean, it's not in the chain of title. It's not gonna come up in a title.
It's never gonna
search.
be in the chain of title, but I hope we get to the point is, you know, having it in our GIS system so somebody can, again, making it easier for buyers to do their due, because we say caveat emptor, buyer beware, but this is totally in the hand of a seller just staying quiet, and a buyer can get burned.
So,
And there's no way for them to find out.
so your thought process is that all of them should be CUPs?
I just don't want to do something that's going to, in an effort to make it easy, we're gonna set up buyers to just kind of walk into like, oh, I had no idea. And we're looking at it, it's like, well, yeah, sorry, we didn't help you out, because there's no requirement that.
And just remember, this is, with our existing code that's adopted, these are all CUPs, we have never turned one down. So we do not wanna prohibit these type of uses, that's not the goal here.
So I guess.
Totally agree, but
So-
I just, if the CUP process is about the best step we can to really put a clear burden on someone, and eventually our GIS maps will, you know, have it where I can click on a parcel and I can find all the conditions.
But I guess my question is, so if you say we put the buyer in, burden for the buyer, because now they try to rent it and they can't. So what's the penalty then? Are we going back to the misdemeanor thing?
Sure,
Say I buy a
sure, yeah,
house
yeah.
and I rent it out, I don't know any different, I rent it out to somebody.
Yeah, it's a misdemeanor.
Again,
You give them notice, if they don't
They
Yes.
give
notice.
notice, but they've got a
Give them
lease,
notice.
they've got a lease, so they got a lawsuit on their hands where the tenant, wait a second, you gave me a 1-year lease and now you're kicking me out after 2 months.
but there's, you know, enforcement typically does not result in.
I guess I was trying to get to, and maybe that's a problem here, I was trying to get to the point where we got out of people's houses. You wanna bring your mother-in-law in, bring your mother-in-law in, your kids in, you know, your nanny, whatever, and I feel like we're gonna stay in it if we don't
Right.
change that.
Right.
I totally get the second dwelling. In my neighborhood, it was done. They actually had to go through the HOA first to get
Right.
permission to do it. Then we approved the CUP, wasn't a big deal. But there was another case where, and I think I mentioned this last time we discussed this, where the folks built it, they didn't know they needed anything special. They put the house on the market, they showed video of the house, and somebody noticed that there were 2 kitchens. And we went out there and said, you need to turn one off, and all they did was put the plug behind the sheetrock and remove the stove. So I was hoping that we would get out of the
Right.
mundane, I want to bring my mother-in-law in.
And that's where you ended up after the.
Yeah.
Right.
So do you have trouble just getting out of it entirely and getting rid of 2 and 3 and saying, you don't have to be related and you can rent it out separately?
Well, that goes to the questions that we dealt with a lot last week about density, because now you're adding maybe density to a small lot, or, you know, so.
But the density's related to not paying rent, or the density's unrelated to paying rent?
Yeah, I guess I would kind of, if I had to go anywhere different than what we agreed last time, would be with Joanne's proposal that if it's within the house, is you're right, add as many rooms as you want. Just if you do a separate house, because it's more likely to be violated, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
Have tenants and,
Right, with a separate structure.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in pretty good shape here with this recommendation. If you work your way through the zoning and go, how's a dwelling defined, how's an accessory defined, it's with a bedroom, if you go through the entire code and try and connect all the dots, then I think we're okay with, that other list that you had here, what has to be relevant. One of the dots though, I think I heard you say that a dwelling unit is defined as a bedroom, bath, whatever, and it members of the immediate family plus up to 4 unrelated.
Well, that's the definition of a family. You said who can live in a house.
Where I'm going with that is this second dwelling unit does not allow an unrelated person, and your question is what if the maid is living and they live in a second dwelling? Should that be permitted? Okay, because the definition of a family unit is a family unit plus up to 4 unrelated. So if you go back to the other slide again, I think it was number 2, only persons related. So do we want to follow the same definition for a family unit in the second dwelling or the first, as the first, so that an unrelated live-in all pair or maid or childcare live-in person could occupy that second dwelling? Is that?
Because I was answering the sort of larger question without the ordinance in front of me, the last sentence of family, which generally is related people or 4 unrelated, says domestic employees employed and residing on the premises are considered part of the family. So you're not gonna run into that problem.
So they can reside in the primary residence or the second, because the second one says only people related. Is that definition of related include domestic help or?
That,
Because they're more likely to live in the second dwelling than the primary dwelling, right? I mean, if you domestic helper live in an all pair.
okay, let me just be clear.
Okay.
Any single family dwelling
Mm-hmm.
can have all the family members
Mhm.
and domestic help. They could also, under this, have an attached
Mm-hmm.
independent dwelling unit for their parents.
Mm-hmm. But not an all pair or live-in maid or a child care or that.
That person was allowed, and I
It's
don't
allowed,
think,
period.
was allowed in the original
I just-
principal structure. Now you're asking me whether the parent's maid also
Well, it
gets
could
to
be a
live somewhere?
caregiver for the parent, or it could be a child care, or it could be the au pair, the maid, whatever. The domestic help, whatever you wanna call it, they're probably not gonna live in the primary residence, if there's a second dwelling or a separate, whatever. I don't wanna get too wrapped around the axle on this, 'cause we've got a lot of ground to cover. We've been at this for quite a while. We're chopping a lot of wood here, but I just share Manny's thought. We wanna get the government out of giving approval for your mother to move in with you, or give approval for your in-law, or give approval for, I mean, that's not the government's role here. If you got a 5-bedroom, 4-bedroom, whatever it is, you know, extended family, as long as they're, the government shouldn't be involved in that, I don't think. So now, how do we do that in a way that still preserves the integrity and doesn't allow loopholes and all that? And that's what we're trying to nail down here, is to get the definitions right so that there aren't loopholes that can be exploited.
And it's for the first user, it's usually set up with good intentions. It's like, how do you manage that as you continue?
Agreed.
So how does it differ from people renting out a room
That's a short-term rental. which you
or
can
as a
rent.
long-term rental? Like a college student?
As long as you are not creating a second kitchen, you're allowed to rent out rooms in your house. The accessory apartment all comes back to creating an independent dwelling unit with a separate kitchen.
There was a question, we had a question from the audience. And I think the answer is yes, right? It would, if you have a garage and you wanna add a room for a handicapped child or parent, whatever, it would still be a second dwelling. The garage is already there, you just wanna add a stove and maybe make it livable.
Then it would be a second dwelling, and depending on where we go,
Right.
is how it would be treated.
Accessory apartment detached. So you could need a CUP for it if you follow staff's
If
recommendations.
it's detached. And we haven't turned one down yet, is that?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
but we've always put the conditions in real clear, so I hear you, getting the government out, I support that, but I would want to do it and remove number 2 and number 3 restriction. Then, and you're in, you stick, the government sticks its nose in, we can't just put our nose in and hope for the best.
Well,
We-
you know,
we
if you're
either step in-
renting to unrelated, then you're more of a hotel than you are just an extended family, that's a little.
Yeah, well,
It's
but
more
it
like
goes back,
it's more like a business.
it goes back to a mechanism to let people
Business.
know what the law is. That's my piece, not so much that we want to get into their affairs, but I want to let people know what the law is. Joanne just said, you know, that first one is all good intentions, all works. It's the sale that worries me, because then we haven't done enough to protect a buyer or to help a buyer out, and suddenly, you know, they, you know, with no bad intentions, they've ended up walking into like, oh geez, what, I can't rent this, I can't walk, you know.
So
It's got a side door, it's a kitchen and a room, it's perfect.
Yeah.
You know.
So if you look, Mr. Lumpkin, some of the other localities such as Hanover, and Chesterfield do require a deed restriction or a signed affidavit.
I
We
would
could look
love a
at
deed
some-
restriction.
something like that.
Something to put, a deed restriction would be great, and the government can then get out, because then it's totally on the, because if we can point to, it's in your chain of title, then I don't feel bad for them. But if it's, you know, you didn't read the Houston County zoning ordinance before you bought this place?
I'm seeing an affidavit, I see Chesterfield.
Deed restrictions.
And
So
right
how
Of
do
course,
you-
that's for the CUP.
That's done with a CUP, so if there is no CUP, how do you put a deed restriction on the property?
You
it's a
can
town
make it
building
a
permit.
condition of the list of conditions
Right.
in the same way that we currently say.
So if somebody reports it when they're building it, we would capture it and put a deed restriction on it.
When they're building it,
When you get a building permit to do this other,
building permit,
then,
CO.
then you can do it by right, but you have to put something in the chain of title so that the buyer knows the rules.
Right, so that would accomplish everything we're after, which is get the government out of it, but don't just be buyer beware, the bit of transparency, disclosure, so that we don't get caught up in these things. Because again, this would land back in the county's lap if there is an issue like that. So it gets us out, preserves transparency, and doesn't open up loopholes to be able to create a bunch of rental units for transient folks. It's really designed for extended families or their related help. So.
Okay with that?
If we can craft something, I mean, it sounds like we don't have to reinvent the wheel here, do we?
Tara, are you comfortable with requiring a deed restriction and how we did that? I mean, it would.
I assume we're
it'd be
gonna do it
illegal
two
document.
ways. One is it would become a condition of our CUPs, and two, we're gonna write it as the use reports for the, as a condition for the.
No, we're talking about for the by right ones.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A
the only way to
condition.
put it in the by right would be.
One of the standards.
Be one of the standards.
Standard
One of the use
conditions.
standards. So again, we're still counting on them to do it, because it's by right.
But can't we, well, it's by right, but getting the building permit, can that
Yeah.
trigger some kind of?
We can make them provide
Can we have
us
that as a
this
step of getting a building
recorded
permit to do
deed.
this use?
Yeah, again, you just have to be, yeah, I don't think either Joanne or I can guarantee you that every time somebody's taking something that's almost a, I don't know, maybe I need to talk to Gary to make sure that in every situation it would involve the getting of a building permit.
It would,
Okay.
yeah.
And they need a CO
Good
to
enough?
occupy that space, right? So again, you know, so the by right, so attached, we're talking, we already went through the with conditions, and if we can tie up the disclosure somewhere in the discovery process so that everybody's aware.
Part of the development standards of the by right use is to get a deed restriction of some sort that clarifies the restrictions. It must be related or whatever we decided, you know, related, connected, and it cannot be rented for
The
minors.
conditions. And then the detached, that's CUP, and that is a little easier.
Yeah, the CUP side is.
It's one of the conditions.
Can it be sort of an either or? If you wanna go the by right route, you have to go get a deed restriction, or you can go through a CUP, and then the
condition.
CUP conditions would be there. So it gives the owner a choice on which route they want to take.
And let me just clarify, so we talk about the deed restriction. I know the other time that county's done a deed restriction that I'm familiar with, it was from a developer as he sold out. So if somebody comes in now to get a building permit, do they then have to file the deed restriction, say before they get their CO? Cause they've already taken that property by deed. And I don't think you're asking us to follow their property for the next 20 years for whenever they deed it to the next person. So you're literally saying they have to then modify the deed to them?
They just have to put something that'll show up in the title chain that shows the restriction. I'm not sure what instrument that would, it wouldn't be another deed, but it's some sort of restriction.
Affidavit, letter agreement, someone asterisk that says this thing has got some other.
And I think we can look at what the other
document.
counties have done. I've not seen one I mean, but you can find things sometimes that are, it's something that'll be indexed to the owner's name, that'll be picked up in a title search.
Put up
So
on
we'd have to
GIS.
look at that to see what that would have to be. It's clearly being done. I'm not familiar
Since-
with how.
Well, most people are doing it with an affidavit. The affidavit does not get tied to the title.
No.
But if you can somehow index it, you can index the affidavit, you can require,
Well, the affidavit right now is in the
just in the file.
benchmarks are being, the affidavit's being provided to the locality, not
Right.
filed. We can look into that.
Since the definition change would happen with just an electrical outlet or a gas connection, can we also trigger it if somebody comes in for an electrical or gas connection permit?
I think when we say building permit, we mean to include
So
everything
any
that
permit,
falls
so if I
under
come in and say I want
permit
to
from
add a,
building
up to
inspections.
20 volts in my bedroom.
Yeah.
It's
You wanna be
special-
doing laundry all the time.
Special television setup.
So that will require some follow-up with respect to what, we can look into.
If some other counties have some sort of way to get it, just get it the chain of title.
Unfortunately, Chesterfield didn't have it as a deed restriction when I was doing their stuff, so I don't know how they do it, but we can find out.
Well, that's probably through their CUP process.
Well, yeah, no, I understand that, but again, most stuff that happens through Chesterfield CUP I've done. This happens to be newer.
Okay, so are we saying we're okay with by right on attached, but CUP for second detached dwelling?
And with a deed restriction for,
The bylaw, adding
For
to
the
the
bylaw.
adding to the development standards that you've
Right.
already outlined, some sort of, we haven't
files.
articulated how to write it, but
Yep.
some sort of, some kind of recordable, restriction or notification in the chain of title.
We make this change, are these things grandfathered? Because my guess is there's many out there that we don't know
yes,
anything about.
they're grandfathered. An existing use in compliance with our code today is grandfathered. Now, today,
Well, it
the
might not be
only
in
time you can
compliance
do
with the
this,
code.
yeah, if it's not in compliance, then it's not grandfathered. So you're only grandfathered if you're in compliance with what the rule was at the time.
Okay.
Do you care about the size or no? That probably
I don't
goes
know.
beyond what you wanna look at from the conversation.
I don't really care about the size, if
Okay.
you're attaching it to your house,
Right.
Um,
Okay.
That was for attached on that?
yeah,
Yeah.
for attached to us, the,
And then see if our attorney's okay with the unrelated living in the second dwelling, the attached by right. 'Cause that's really where the.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's
unrelated
right. Go back to those standards, those. Can we clarify number two?
And understanding that Joanne and I need to make sure when we're not in the midst of this, that it works, perhaps we would be able to say something in number two that talks about family, which would then drive people to their family definition, which is how
Right.
you could then have your domestic employee,
Only members of the family can reside in the second.
Yeah.
only family, if we say only family, something like that, is that?
Cause then that, the all or whatever.
Yeah.
Again, it's not allowed, you're not allowed to charge rent, right? So this is a non-rental, but it's somebody that's living there to support the family, to support you.
Okay.
Okay.
Alright,
Alright.
so that was the hardest decision we'll have to make.
I
today.
hope
So
so.
everything
Well,
else, we're just gonna roll through,
We haven't
okay?
gotten to implant yet.
We have clear what an article that is.
Yeah, it would have been the
All
last.
right, and we'll bring this back to you guys, so you can see it again. All right, so I'm gonna review the ag districts real quickly. We have 3. We are recommending deleting the forestal conservation. This is a zoning map. The lighter green, in the west is A1, the, darker green in the east is A2. You can see majority of our county is zoned agricultural. We've added lots of new by right uses. That was part of the emphasis of the modernizing the code is we did a lot of benchmarking with other localities, saw what they had. So the following new uses have been added by right: community garden, farm operation, greenhouse nursery production, wetland mitigation bank, taxidermy shop, government buildings, park and ride facilities, and pick your own farms. Pick Your Own was added based on comments from our joint work session. So these are uses that are permitted by right with development standards. Accessory apartments, so that's still, we'll be looking at that. Farm stand, farmer's market, home occupation, small cell facilities, and telecommunication towers. So the home occupation was revised to broaden how you can do home occupations. With the existing code, you could only do it in your main structure. You couldn't do it in an accessory building. A lot of people do it in their garage or barn. So we added standards for that. And the telecommunication tower was revised to meet the new FCC regulations. And then we added the small cell facilities. So new CUP uses in our ag A1 and A2, farm distribution hub, farm and feed store, livestock market, car wash, convenience store, gas station, retail uses, solar energy farms, gunsmith shops, adult daycare centers, commercial recreation, electronic message signs. This again was a decision point from our joint work session. We talked about where did we want to allow electronic message signs, and if so, where and how. What both the Planning Commission and Board decided is that we would add them as CUP uses in our agricultural, commercial, and industrial districts. Overnight respite care and home-based businesses were all added as CUP uses. Difference between a home-based business and a home occupation is a home-based business would allow you to have employees.
Ryan, before you move on, one of the comments from Ms. Lascolette was on solar energy farms. Even though we have them as CUP uses, should we set standards and guidelines for them? Do we have?
Typically, how we do that is we have uniform CUP conditions.
Right.
And that we share, and so when someone files an application for, say, the automobile sales, we have a list of standard CUP conditions that the planner can pull up and go, okay, well, these all apply. This guy might also need me to add this. So it's more policy driven than set by the board. But like today,
Right.
with all the CUPs, the accessory apartments have all had the same conditions.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think she was asking for us to get into them, but for us to have standards
Right.
for,
And we can look at adding that to our standard CUP conditions.
and it could be done later.
We did some more revising of names just to make it easier. Single wide and double wide became manufactured home dwelling, manufactured homes. Fruit and vegetable stands, farm stand, lodges, just some clarification language. Really not changing the thing, but just making it easier to find in alphabetical order.
That concerns, right, that bottom one.
Two-family dwelling becomes accessory apartment, detached and attached. So that would all, we would need to, there's, every decision we make has a ripple effect throughout the whole ordinance. So depending on what we decide,
Yeah.
we will have to
Tweak that.
tweak that.
Before, maybe it's the one before this, on the definition of single wide and double wide. can we add, mini or tiny homes?
We actually have that as a use standard, and I had
Mhm.
got Susan's list, so I have
Okay.
a slide for it coming
Alright.
up.
On that one, Mr. Chair, on this one, second to last bullet, where was I?
Campground, or was it on this
It
one?
was on this one, second to last bullet, radio controlled airplanes. Are drones captured in here anywhere, or?
No, so that was very specific in the code, somebody must have asked for it, so radio controlled model airplane club, we just changed it to clubs private, whatever your interest is.
We actually have
It could be a
one.
train one, or.
One
was
of the only
wondering.
ones in the state in Gushman, near the rest area off of, near Oilville.
An airplane club?
Mhm.
Okay. Now, I'm just wondering where in the zoning ordinance we capture drone activity? Or is that just?
That's
anybody can do that?
regulated by the FAA, or if, I
This
guess.
is again about a club,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so it's about zoning for
Drone club.
a club.
As you drone
As
club, I
opposed to
guess,
just the use
can
of
have
drones.
well, drone club, we're saying. if
Would,
it's-
I
if
guess
it's
a
not
drone
permitted,
club
it
would
can't
fall
be.
under this.
Yeah,
I think by interpretation it would. Would that be correct?
be all clubs, any clubs, whatever their interest is.
Just have to make sure the drone club isn't near a ski trap range, 'cause it might get canceled.
And you know, that's your own risk.
Mr. Chair, so the processing plant for agricultural and forestry products, so you could, I assume the processing plant includes like a manufacturing element, say if
Yes.
you're doing feed,
Mhm.
you know, feed supplements or whatever,
Right.
something.
So it's just, it's
Just
just
anything that-
changing the name of how it's referenced, but the definition and all did not change.
Just some agriculture, I mean, some, a manufacturing element of an agricultural. Okay, I got it.
Okay. For the A3 district, we just added that you can have all A1 uses. We have no A3 in the county. That is the most intense. It allows intensive swine facilities and abattoirs and things like that. And we deleted the nutrient management requirements and replaced them with the state code requirements, because the state does require that. So in response to discussions at our joint work session, there was a question of why we had some as microbrewery, some were micro distillery. We've changed that, we've removed the word micro. We added water and wastewater treatment plant with the CUP in A1 and A2. We had one but not the other. And we also clarified the definition of a junkyard, and that's the accumulation of more than 200 square feet. So.
Of anything.
Yes. Any questions on ag before I move to the residential districts? Okay, so here are our residential districts. We have 2 rural residential districts, 4 more subdivision style, and then 3 more unusual ones. So the anything that's a yellow color is our residential districts. So you can see some large ones out in the eastern and western part of where there's a lot of ag. Those are usually the RR or the RP, and then more of the orange ones that are probably hard to show up, but some of them would be the RPUDs like here and here. So for all the residential districts, we removed language that lot width is exclusive of lakes and rivers. The height used to say 1 story, we changed that to 15 feet. We deleted the term low density, medium density, high density from any of the statement of intents, because everybody has a little bit different definition of that. So instead, we added the minimum lot size for those districts. And all the residential districts got the following uses added by right, which are required with the state code, is the family day home, assisted living and group home for 8 people or less, and a temporary health care structure. The following uses were changed to uses with development standards, commercial vehicle marking. It talks about if you have a commercial vehicle and having it be screened, allowing construction trailer for use during construction of the home, and then home occupations, as I discussed with the ag districts. New by right use with standards, accessory apartments. Again, we'll go back and take a look at how we do that. A new CUP use is adult daycare. And then, some of the sections that were specific to animals, like the chicken keeping, we moved the use standards. We deleted shared access information that didn't really make any sense. And we clarified staff's authority to waive the open space requirements. It says we cannot waive it clarifies that we cannot waive the amount of open space. Same changes to the RP district as we did in the RR, and removed telephone booth references.
Where's Superman gonna get dressed?
Instead of whites, apparently.
Yeah. Moving into more our smaller lots, R1 district, that specifically had a prohibition on home occupations. We removed that. Again, moved the animal sections to the use standards. And we deleted nursery schools and private kindergartens because it already has schools, which is a by right use. One change that we're proposing for the lot width, so you can see by the acreage, is a little bit different based on whether you have utilities. So if you have public utilities, both of them, you can have a lot size of 24,000 square feet. Goes up to 1 acre if you have one utility but not both, and then 1.5 if you have both private utilities. But the lot size did not grow up gradually, so we're adding that 150-foot lot width for if you're 1 acre lot served by one utility. In the R3 district, this is several changes that we've made based on our discussion with the Planning Commission and the board. We added to the statement of intent that multifamily uses are only recommended in village areas where served by public utilities. We added the same use changes in R1, and this was a decision point with you and the Planning Commission. We did change that duplexes and triplexes for properties zoned after the date of the adoption of the ordinance from a by right use to a CUP use. The RN district, which is our residential neighborhood district, 15,000 square feet, we made the same use changes as the R1 district. And there was a provision in all the residential districts that there's no open space requirements if there's 6 lots or fewer, and when that ordinance was done, it missed the RN district, so that makes all the residential districts consistent. The RO district, we used to have a maximum building lot coverage of 20%. We've changed that to an impervious coverage because that's a calculation that they already have to provide for stormwater, so it just makes sense. The lighting section was actually did not agree with the new lighting standards, and the ground cover sections did not agree with the landscaping sections, so we deleted those. And then we clarified that when there's a parking area, only when it's adjacent to residential do they have to have a wall or fence. The RPUD, same use changes as R1. We deleted submittal requirements that were repetitive. The base density used to be 2 units per acre, and you could go up to 2.5 units per acre with environmental incentives. I think we talked about how ridiculous the environmental incentives were. They were things like excellence in siting of buildings and excellence in siting compared to wind and ridiculous things. So we just deleted the incentives and made the base density 2.5 units per acre. We'll say by the time you meet all the other RPUD standards, it's very difficult to get to that 2.5. We decreased the open space requirements from 30 to 25%, but you cannot include the 35-foot perimeter buffer, so this will allow more interior open space. Added sidewalk requirements on one side of the street except for short cul-de-sacs. Deleted the floor area ratio requirements, and there used to be a provision that the density could not exceed 6 units per acre, but you could draw that line any way you wanted it, and it was not getting us what we wanted. So the changes to the mobile home park is shortened to clarify the statement of intent, and we've changed the term mobile home to manufactured home. We removed a requirement that that the manufactured home cannot be within 500 feet of an existing residence. We changed the road requirements to current fire standards. We deleted the electrical and plumbing code standards and referenced that it has to be in compliance with the state building code. We deleted specific parking requirements and deleted provisions that fires shall be only made in stoves and other equipment, because they'd have to meet all the standards of the fire marshal. Okay, the MPUD district. So the only change we made to that is right now, there's that provision for asking for a CUP for certain, for any standards. It was not clear of what sections you could ask for a special exception for. We had somebody come in and try to use that as using it, developing it in an area other than the Centerville Village Core. So we clarified that the standards are only dealing with design standards, site development regulations, land use ratios, and open space requirements. Based on Mr. Lumpkin's comments, we are relooking at the boundary and the definition of how to define that MPUD district and maybe making some modifications, but we do not have that complete at this time. So that
before you-
is the
Yeah.
residential
Go ahead.
districts.
We had substantial conversation, not only amongst this board, but the feedback we got from the residents on input. And I think it sort of is relevant to other residential districts. The takeaway we had last time was, while there are things we may not agree, would like better defined, more clarity, that we would address those in the next comp plan revision or in one of the opportunities when we go to do the village studies. Those is where we would dive much more deeper into the individual components of not only input but many of the other ones as well. And so I just want to make sure that the board is still comfortable with that approach, because we recognize that these areas need more specific effort dedicated to them.
Any concerns with that or? So-
Yeah, I guess I'd agree with the statement that, you know, there's
work to be done.
Yeah, there's work to be done. We did the MPUD years ago with a broad brush, and we figured the first one through will flush out some things. And I think there are some loopholes in there that can be exploited, and probably need to address.
Susan had a whole list of things, so I think the answer is we're gonna work on it. A future board is gonna work on it and clarify.
We were hoping to do that in December before you left.
Oh, okay. Do it at the end of
24th,
December in a
25th.
special work session,
Yeah.
and I don't have to vote on it.
Mr. Chair, if I could just make, and if I could just make one quick comment about RPUD. So it was having a conversation, and it became kind of a bit of a head scratcher. So for example, Kinloch development, this is different for some of the other maybe different for different RPUDs. So it's a hodgepodge of curb and gutter, for example, and not curb and gutter. So the question is, okay, how were those individual streets or whatever so determined not to be that way? Not obviously having the master plan from way back when, don't know how, but I guess what I would suggest is that when the staff begins to look at RPUD and the future with as a work project, that kind of figure out why we have potentially a hodgepodge of why are things the way, why are some streets curb and gutter? You go to Rivergate, I think Rivergate mostly is curb and gutter.
Yeah.
You go into Meadows, which I think is also an RPUD. Zero. It's just kind of your rural look roads. So what is that determined somewhere in the RPUD?
It has nothing to do with the
Design-
RPUD, so we do
design.
not have standards that require curb and gutter. So it's up to the developer, and
Yeah.
sometimes they may have to put it in to help drainage or for some engineering purpose. Sometimes they don't put it in, it's not required. So we did add a requirement that they're having sidewalks on one side of the street, Typically, if they're gonna have a sidewalk, they'll go ahead and do the curb and gutter, it's not required, but more than likely you would get it there, but curb and gutter is not a requirement.
Do you have to be in the, where's Todd? Do you have to be in, the TCSD to have curb and gutter drainage into a sewer complex? I mean, do you have to-
No, that's storm sewer related.
I mean, do you have to have a place for the water to go, or is it just in a BMP, or?
Just BMP.
So, you
Yeah,
need at
it's-
least a BMP, if not the TC, because it wouldn't go
That
to
would be independent of the
TCSD.
Tioga Creek Service District.
Because if it finds its way to the
Stormwater
city,
requirements, regulations would be different.
it'd be different.
Yeah.
So if you're not in the TCSD, then it's just stormwater goes to a BMP, and that's one set of restrictions. If you're in the TCSD, if you send it into the sewer.
It's the same. Stormwater would be the same, countywide. The TCSD is just for sanitary sewer, not storm sewer. We don't combine the two.
They're not, it's not a combined
Yeah,
system.
they
Okay, 'cause
call
there
that
are
a CSO, combined sewer.
There are,
Yeah.
you know, Lynchburg and a few others.
Richmond's got it really, yeah.
Yeah.
The goal is to not combine those two items.
So ours are not combined now.
Ours are not combined. That's correct.
So I didn't want to have to do curb and gutter, send it into a sewer, send it to TCSD, and then pay for the treatment down in Richmond. I didn't do it.
Right,
So,
yeah.
okay.
So,
Okay.
They're not-
so the answer to Bob's
Okay.
question is, we don't have curb and gutter regulations, so they put them where they need them,
Where they want to.
or where they want to.
Depend on the law, like Mannequin Farms is a much more rural, larger lot subdivision.
The Meadows, yeah,
The
they're 5
Meadows.
acres.
Overlay district.
Overlay. Kinlock overlay district.
Kinlock
requires it.
Okay, any other questions on residential before we move on
And
to
then the
commercial?
RO is the same, we're gonna revisit that later as well, the RO, we talked about some of the potential changes there. But, cause you had some changes here for RO, but just not, and I guess the question would be for these changes here that you have for RO,
These would not be substantive changes.
we've got an applicant in now already. Would they be subject to these changes, or would they, since they fill out the application before, I guess they would have just filled it, because they just had the community meeting a couple days ago.
Mhm.
But if they fill out the app before we adopt this, then are they under the old?
It would be when their zoning was approved, whether it was before or after.
When the zoning was approved, not when they filled out the application. Okay. Because we have one in now, we're talking about some changes, and we're talking about more changes later. Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, business districts, those are shown on red in our zoning map. You see the Broad Street corridor, and then basically around most of our interstate interchanges as our commercial districts, and then, you know, some of the courthouse area. So we had 4 business districts. B1 is our, you know, general business, variety of commercial, office, and entertainment uses. Business limited, which is our neighborhood type commercial, less intense, more transitional. And then B3 allows for increased height, and that's only recommended in areas adjacent to the interstate. And we are recommending to delete the planned office park. So in all commercial and industrial districts, we clarified additional landscaping is needed if the use is adjacent to residential or agricultural. That is in our code now. It sort of was slipped in the parking section, so we put it in each section that they knew if they're adjacent to a residential district, they have to have a 30-foot landscape buffer. So changes to the B1 district is we've updated the statement of intent, tied it to the comp plan, and then we divided uses into categories so that it's easier to find things: general commercial and office, food and beverage uses, recreation, entertainment, public, institutional, light industrial, and utilities. We added the following by right uses: auction house, bicycle sales and repair shop, gas station, personal services, packing and mailing services, shopping center, studios and shops for artists, teachers, and other craftsmen, not exceeding 3,000 square feet, car wash and indoor recreational facilities, brew pub, catering, meal delivery, brewery, distillery, college or university, park and ride lot, government services, and broadcasting studio. So those are all recommended as new by right uses. Recommended adding the CUP use to the B1 district, that electric message sign, as I talked about in the A1, that's based on the decision that was made at the last meeting. The following uses will have development standards: adult businesses, child care center, drive-through business, temporary construction trailer, shopping center, and small cell facilities. So they would all refer you to the use section for the additional standards. Moving on to the B2 district, we're recommending changing the name from B2 Business Limited to Neighborhood Business so that it would fall before the B1 district, so they would be in order of intensity. We clarified that this is a transitional use between residential and more intense commercial, and just general cleanup in that section. B3, the only thing we did was added small cell facilities with development standards, and that's all I have for the commercial districts. Any questions? Okay, move to the industrial districts. The industrial districts are shown in the lavender and the purple. Lavender is M1. You can see that primarily in the West Creek area. And then our M2 is heavy industrial, the Ashland corridor, and then up near Hayden'sville, Fife as well, and a few areas. This is the Luck and a few other areas throughout the county. So again, new uses in our industrial districts: animal grooming, animal shelter, art studio, auction facility, automobile rental, automobile storage lot, catering, electric vehicle charging stations, gas stations, government maintenance, music, dance, or martial arts studios, printing or other reproduction facilities, retail sales, taxi or limousine service, and then the original code has probably like 10 or 12, and it says manufacture of. So we just came up with one standard: manufacturing light and manufacturing heavy. That's for the M1 and the M2. The electronic message center, as we talked about adding in the industrial districts as well. And one change we did make was a health club was a CUP use. We are recommending that go to a permitted use. With standards would be automobile rental, automobile storage lot, brewery, cidery, distillery, and sale of trucks, trailers, etc. And that's all I have for industrial.
What do our axe throwing guys fall under?
They are under the health club. Indoor recreation, I think it is.
Where is that?
Yeah, indoor recreation.
Where is indoor recreation?
I think it's already an
It's
existing, it's an existing
So these are
standard.
just changes?
These are just ones we're adding.
I didn't want to
There's
get
a
that.
recreational facility indoor.
Yeah.
Includes billiard, bowling alley, skating rinks, swimming
So
pool,
we're not
tennis
listing
court.
everything here, it's just.
No, I'm just listing what we're
Just
adding.
didn't want to get them mad at us, that's all.
Yeah, no, we like that, the axe throwing, we don't wanna make sure that stays.
Especially not them, 'cause they're
Yeah.
really good at it.
Yeah. Okay, use standards, so I think I covered most of these in the presentation, so these are all the uses now that had their existing uses in the county. They had standards, but it was somewhere else in the code, so we've sort of conglomerated it all into one section, so it's much easier to use. These are all more that were there, so multiple principal structures on a lot, that got changed based on our decision, so how we decide to do with accessory apartment, that will get changed again. But again, these all had standards throughout the code that will all be in one section now. And then these are the new uses that we've added. And tiny houses and revised ones for home occupation, commercial vehicle, and communication towers. So I knew Ms. Lasplett had asked about tiny houses. So we do not have any requirement for minimum house size, maximum house size. If you want to build a tiny house, you're more than welcome to build a tiny house. However, we do treat it as a single family dwelling, so it needs to meet all the standards of a dwelling. So it has to get a building permit, well and septic permits are required, and comply with all zoning. A foundation is required if the house is over 256 square feet. If it's 256 square feet or less, no foundation is required, but you have to meet these additional standards. And this is, the building code officials have actually come out with some standards for tiny houses, and this is right from the building code.
If it doesn't have, a foundation and it's over 256 square feet, is that a CUP? Is that like a mobile home?
No, they'd have to put it on a foundation.
They have to have, so it's not this, what about mobile homes? Do they have to be on a foundation?
Yes, mobile homes have to be on a foundation as well.
They all do as well, so we don't have a CUP process for mobile home, okay.
And in fact, we also say that you can't have, like a recreational vehicle cannot be used as a permanent dwelling because it's not a permanent foundation.
So we don't, I guess, we don't define tiny. It's just, everybody knows it when you see it. I mean, we got a standard for tiny. Okay.
So,
A
If you don't
tiny
need more,
home
we
could
don't-
be 2,000 square feet in Goochland, right?
What's
Yeah.
tiny to one person?
And it's all the
District
standards
five.
still apply.
District 5, less than 5,000 square feet.
doghouse. Joanne, I do have a question, because I thought that you couldn't have a mobile home without a CUP. We had a case of somebody who lives in my district that had a mobile home, the mobile home burned down. He didn't take care of it within a year. When he came to get his permit, they told him, no, it's been more than a year, so you can no longer have it. You can no longer,
It might have been an existing grandfathered one without.
so what was grandfathered about it? The foundation maybe?
Maybe that it didn't have a foundation.
So
I'm
he
not
could've-
familiar with what case you're speaking of.
So he could have replaced it, I'm sure I still have notes.
Mhm.
So he could have replaced it with another mobile home as long as he put in the foundation. I don't think that was clear.
Hard to know what the
Right.
reason is that he could have it and then he couldn't without.
The only thing I can think of is that it was a non-conforming use and.
I'm sure
he just beat his
Anita knows what I'm
timeframe.
talking about. The individual's already has passed away, so I couldn't go back to him.
That had something to do with the permits for the well and stuff.
Yeah.
Ms. Lascolette had some questions about farm stands. So we are allowing farm stands by right for farms. One roadside stand per farm or agricultural unit. Sales are limited to products that are grown on the property. It cannot exceed 200 square feet. It has to be set back 25 feet from the right of way. And if you can't meet these conditions, you can get a CUP. I think Ms. Lascolette was thinking we were limiting it to one table, and it's really.
One table seems very restrictive.
Yeah, and it's one stand or one agricultural unit. So if you've got different people growing different things on the farm, you can have multiple.
Okay.
Any other questions on the use standards? No. Okay, move to the plan of development. So we had 1, 3, and 4 are existing plans of development. We did add the minor POD. This is to address the comp plan initiative of making it easier for people to develop in some of our existing structures in our rural crossroads. So for all of the plan of developments, general changes was reorganize the section to include applicability and submittal requirements in one place. They were sort of spread throughout the chapter. We added a requirement for floor area ratio calculation and loading spaces to be part of the submittal. Added a provision for cluster mailbox units. If they're required, they have to show them on the POD, and there's some parking required with that. We clarified language regarding access easements that were confusing, and we also added a provision for road extension signs for any stub roads. So any roads that are stubbed, they will now put a sign up at the end that says this road will potentially be extended, so that people will know about it and would not buy. It kind of helps that buyer beware thing. So this is something new that was not part of the discussion when it came before you with the Planning Commission. but it's something that we've been thinking about as we're seeing more, H.H. Hunt has single-family and townhouse mixed in the same development. Other developers have come and spoken to us about future projects that may have similar mixes. So we have a very clear standard of when you have single-family, you have to have more than two access points once you go over 49 lots. When you have townhouses or multifamily, that standard is 82. So what do you do when they're mixed together? So this is what this is trying to address. So what I'm adding under the plan of development required improvements, where it talks about those access requirements, when single-family units and townhouse units are located within the same development, each housing unit is counted towards the number of lots for access purposes unless a conceptual plan was approved prior to January 1. So H.H. Hunt would be grandfathered, but anybody else coming in, we would require that be 49 lots for a second access point, regardless of whether it's single-family detached or a townhouse.
Do you remember what section that was?
Yeah, I can give it to you. Added the exception provision. This is dealing with the subdivision improvements of when you have to have base coating, final coating, fire suppression, all of that in the development. We did add a minor waiver that allows them to get a temporary CO or an issuance of a building permit for no more than 3 lots. So that way it doesn't shut them down entirely, but they can get no more than 3 lots beyond this. And the development community was grateful for that. The other change is, this is another change based on the development community's review of the application. The goal of this was always to have the improvements done before someone started living in there. So we are recommending that we change the language from prior to the issuance of a building permit to CO, that this access has to be installed. Their concern was that if they have to install the road and then they have to tear it up for utilities and things like that, if we do it at the time of CO, it's still done by the time a citizen's in there. And then they asked that the subdivision and road just needs to be paid for 25 feet, not the 50 feet. So the 25 feet would allow 1 full truck on the road before it pulls out. And this is all temporary during the construction process. We've added the minor POD process. That's when there's minimal land disturbance or site changes. So that's when you're not disturbing more than 10,000 square feet, you're not changing the flow. With the minor POD for uses that require 1 to 25 parking spaces, you can have gravel. If you go to a larger, parking facility of 26 or more spaces, then you do have to have the hard surface. And we also clarified that no landscape plan is required for the minor PODs. Rural POD, we didn't make any changes to that. That's very similar to the minor POD, but that's dealing with agricultural uses. We did clarify the waiver is if they're not doing any land disturbance, or if it's just, someone moved out of a portion of a shopping center and the exact same use is moving in, then they can just get a POD waiver. They don't have to go through any new process.
Back to all those parking spaces, just for my own knowledge, do we have any requirements, like what point do you need a handicapped parking space?
Every time, so that's, building code kicks that in, and you need one. You have to meet ADA requirements.
And those are not, they can't be, do they need to be paved?
The parking area has to be paved. It has to be paved from the parking lot all the way, and clear access to a bathroom. So into the building and into a bathroom.
So all that stuff you just went over, that doesn't change the requirement,
right,
that they may have to have a paved accessible, okay.
Yeah, that's all in the building code.
Thank you.
Clarified the difference between a Board of Supervisors waiver request and the administrative waiver. The administrative waiver is from the POD. The board can waive any requirement, such as paving and things like that. They can come to the BOS for that. And we clarified that lighting, landscaping, and other similar improvements can be bonded. We go to parking. This was the area that we've had the most interpretation. We had only probably about 29 uses for parking, so we were always trying to find a similar use and use it. We went through the entire code and provided parking calculation for every use in the code. We benchmarked against a lot of other localities and always chose the smallest parking standard. So these are the parking requirements that we added. On the left-hand side is the agricultural uses, right-hand side is residential uses, commercial and office uses that we added parking requirements for, food and drink and recreation uses, public institutional type uses, and industrial uses. Moving on to streets, highways, bless you, and access management. This was previously in our subdivision ordinance, but as we got through this, we wanted to have all the development standards in one place so that someone knew where they needed to go. They could just go to the development standards chapters and they know what applies. So we did move that into the zoning ordinance. When we just made some modifications to terms like county department, planning department, county engineer. We deleted duplicative definitions and flag lot standards that were already in the code, and deleted ineffective graphics and those that were already in the MTP. The way it works is each road is assigned an access category, then the access category, you go to a chart and it sets the standards for driveway spacing, crossover spacing, signal spacing, and turn lanes. And then we also codified our turn lane requirements for commercial and industrial uses. And there is a typo in that, I'm sorry, I just caught it. Landscaping, so this is our new landscaping district. Before, each zoning district had repetitive standards that were exactly the same. So we've taken that and moved it all to its own chapter. We included the purpose of why you have landscaping standards and clarified that all developments with land disturbance greater than 10,000 square feet require a landscape plan. It outlines what needs to be submitted. We changed square feet calculation to linear feet. What needs to be landscaped is the 10-foot strip along the roadway. The perimeter parking has to have landscaping around it. There has to be at least 10% of the interior parking lot has to be landscaped. And you have to have a row of shrubs around the perimeter parking. We did delete a requirement that all trees 6-inch caliber or greater had to be maintained. That's very difficult to achieve, but we did allow, if they do maintain them, that they can get credits based on the number of additional plantings that are required. So this shows you our existing standards, and then that shows it with the proposed standards. So it really doesn't change the number, it changes how they're distributed. With lighting, we did general cleanup and formatting. That ordinance was just adopted about 6 years ago, and it was in pretty good shape. The sign ordinance probably had the most changes based on the Supreme Court ruling. Our sign ordinance as adopted right now is not in compliance. It is unconstitutional, as well as most localities in the country. So if this is adopted with the zoning rewrite, this would be a constitutional sign ordinance. So we made major revisions to eliminate content-based signs. So content-based signs are anything dealing that says, like, if you have to read it to figure out what type of sign it is. Business signs, directional signs, farm signs, home occupation signs, political campaign signs, real estate signs, yard sale signs. Those are all content-based signs because you have to read it to determine what type of sign it is. Now we can only look at the number of signs, the size of signs, the location of signs, but we can't define them as different types of signs. So we added some definitions for some signs. We prohibited signs that move, emit smoke, sound, scent, ones that are carried. And we also added time frames for sign permit decisions. That was not in our existing code and is required. Permit electronic message signs as a CUP in agricultural, commercial, and industrial districts with general display and brightness control standards. Last time we talked about this, we told you that Albemarle County required special exceptions for all electronic signs. You asked me to look at what they look at with their CUP. We did that, so Albemarle has indicated that since they adopted the ordinance 4 years ago, they've had 3 requests for the electronic message signs. So it's not something that we're gonna see overrun with people, and these are really expensive signs. One of them happened to be their firehouse, one was a church, and one was I believe a daycare center. But these are some of the standards that they included in their CUP. I know, Mr. Lumpkins, you had some concerns of what, if we did it a CUP, what sort of things would be our standards. And it's things that we were including as part of our benchmarking of, you know, how messages, what colors they are, type of typefaces.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, if you could, third one up. 4 times an hour?
Yes, and we were looking at, I think ours was 1 a minute is what we were looking at. So, and again, that may be something that through the CUP process, there's different standards that I have found based on the speed limit of the road it's on and things like that. So, through a CUP process, we would be able to provide some little more in-depth information. I will say this is the only, we had 2 people speak at the Planning Commission public hearing. One of the people spoke supporting adding the electronic message signs. However, they would prefer a faster turnover on that sign message. They look at colors and graphics, illumination, automatic controls, and then they do not allow wall-mounted EMS signs, just detached freestanding signs.
What's the CD per M square, what does that stand for?
That is a measurement that they use for some of them. We would not, when we were looking at it, we were not recommending using that measurement because we do not have the meters for them. We would use foot candles, which is what there's 2 ways to determine the illuminancy, and one is foot candles. I can't remember what CDM squared stands for, but it's a measurement of light. But the hard thing is most people don't have these meters, so most people use foot candles, and that's this term that is pretty consistent. We also added gas stations that they can have 16 square feet of the LED signs for the pricing. We cannot say it's for pricing because that's content based, so we just say they can have 16 square feet, and how they choose to use it is their decision. Added temporary signs limited to 25 square feet for a 30-day period only. And then allow height measurements from the road grade instead of the ground when the ground is lower. Consolidated requirements to maintain and remove signs and required signs to be in accordance with the state building code. We created a table for the districts for the number, type, sign area, setback, and sign height. We did add height limits for all sign types. We deleted the by right use for showing time, date, and temperature or weather because that's content based, so we cannot have that anymore. We did change the setbacks in agricultural and residential districts from 15 feet to 10 feet. And we did add provisions for signs for subdivision entrances, construction signs, and raised signs in commercial districts. We also added a lot of graphics to the sign section, and these are some of the examples of the graphics. All right, almost home. The overlay districts, we reformatted so that each overlay district had more consistency. They were outlined in the same manner, same format, same setback, even though it's different districts. We required that all requirements are in addition to the underlying zoning requirements. We improved the graphics and deleted ineffective ones. I did review the overlay districts with the DRC. We went through pretty detailed. Only recommendation they had was they wanted one section that dealt with the graphics that would apply to all districts, such as like the HVAC screening and dumpster screening and all. So we created a new section when there's graphics that would apply to all the districts. But other than that, they were pretty happy with the changes, and they really liked the new graphics because they felt like the graphics that we had right now were not effective. So they were excited about that. We deleted statements that were repetitive in each district, and again have one section that applies to all the districts. We exempted signs from the COA requirement unless it's a new development, and codified that administrative review of COAs that we're doing. In Oilville, we just cleaned up, modernized some of the terms, so concrete masonry block units are now more known as split face block. T11 was in there. That's already, it's just another term for plywood that was already in there. And we deleted the parking lot landscaping standards because the new code has higher standards now than what was in the overlay. In the courthouse, we added as approved material stained wood, vinyl, anodized aluminum, and that gutters can be painted aluminum or copper. For trim materials, we excluded extruded fiberglass or plastic, and deleted as a discouraged roof material imitation slate, because now the quality of that product has increased, where I don't think it needs to be excluded anymore. In the River Road Patterson, we had 3 buffer standards depending on where you had your building setback and your parking. They were very similar, almost no differences between them, so we kind of combined them into one, and we've changed the standards from square foot to linear feet, how we're doing it through the rest of the code. For the floodplain, we made no substantive changes. The floodplain district is something that FEMA is currently mapping, providing new maps to the county, and they are going to be providing the county a model ordinance. So that's something that will probably have come back up. We were supposed to get that information this summer, have not gotten it yet, so probably by this spring we'll be taking a look at that again. Non-conforming lot structures and uses, we added state law requirement to allow repair, rebuilding, or replacement if they're damaged by natural disaster, fire, or other acts of God. BZA, this is really just cleanup, deleted things that were already in the bylaws, included state law requirement that the secretary notify the court before the members' terms end, added time for appeal of a BZA decision, just being general cleanup. Definitions, we provided, just like the parking, we provided a definition for every use. And then rules of measurement, that last section provides a lot of graphics. How do you measure lot width? How do you measure setbacks? These are all new things that we always get questions on, but it's now in there for everybody. How do you calculate open space and all? And the development community gave a lot of positive feedback on that section. So in terms of public comment opportunities, have had over 20 planning commission work sessions. We've had 3 citizen meetings, 4 board of supervisor work sessions, 1 joint PC and board work session. I've met with the development review committee. We've had 2 developer roundtable meetings. We've reached out to various groups and offered presentations, and the changes, all the changes from those groups have been incorporated in this latest document. So the only, unless there's other things from the board through today, we have to clean up accessory apartments and still continue that conversation. The goal, so on the 19th, the planning commission approved it. Like I said, we had 2 people speak at the public hearing. The work session was today. We are asking for the board to advertise a public hearing on November 6th. And if the board were to take action at that date or at a future date, we would also recommend that the ordinance go into effect on January 1st. And the only other thing I wanna tell you is that budgeted for this project, we had $50,000. And the only thing, we have done everything in-house except for the graphics, which ended up being about $10,000. So everything else was done in-house by staff.
Wow. It's
Amazing.
phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
I got a few questions.
Mr. Tompkins.
Back to signs, you rolled through it, but I'm just making sure I understand, reading through it, that I understand where we landed. You need a CUP to put up a sign unless it is a sign listed in 15-415, which has signs not requiring a permit.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes.
What does the CUP cost?
CUP cost is $750.
Okay. So, all right, so that's that, all right? I want to editorialize.
Can I quote you for that?
You're gonna, I want to editorialize, but I'll resist. You talk about getting government out,
Your
but.
thumbs up.
But anyhow, outdoor advertising sign, parentheses billboard, that's defined in here. And billboard says, see outdoor advertising sign, and outdoor advertising sign, parentheses billboard says, a sign structure providing displays or display space for general advertising and not primarily or necessarily for advertising related to the premises on which erected or to nearby premises. I can see that. So if I have a sign and I have my business sign and something happens and it's congratulations Beth and Tom on your wedding, or remember 9/11 or something like that. That seems like it might take them out of general advertising, something. So I just read that. I have some concerns about that. It seems like we're moving. If we were to read that literally, we would be getting into content, but not so much that. I just think it's. What are we trying to accomplish here? Are we trying to just avoid giant billboards?
Yes.
Or are we,
Yes.
When we talk about them, we wanna know that's what we're talking about, trying to figure out how, when you talk about that, you know that's what you're saying.
well, it seems to me the size would be the concern, and not so much that, because if I read this, it says you must be then advertising something related to your premises. So I guess for a church sign, pray without ceasing or something, I guess that's related to the church. But I'm trying to think of situations where, again, congratulations Beth and Tom on your wedding, or, I just see that we're a little too.
Public service, Amber Alerts, that kind of stuff.
Sure,
Which
yeah,
is-
there's examples of, that's not a general advertising pertaining to the premises or nearby. So how do you, I can see slipping out and suddenly you're becoming an outdoor advertising sign. I think most of us think of billboards as giant signs, but there's no size restriction here, so.
Tara, if I recall, this is pretty standard language from most localities use it.
I don't
mean,
know
we
that I
could-
benchmarked it, it reads very similarly to me as what I'm
it's
consistent with, but I haven't
We can
specifically looked at it.
relook at this if you'd like us to
It
take a look
does
at
seem
it.
to regulate content.
Yeah, you gotta watch the technically, can a church rent in signs that say shop at Publix or something? I mean, it's. 'cause you can't-
That would be
can't
a
reg-
billboard, I think,
can't-
right there.
I mean, you can't regulate the content, see? So,
And that has to do with whether it's on premises or off premises, really.
We can regulate.
You can regulate the
that.
content, it says you must be advertising something pertaining to the premises.
Yes.
Right.
But that's what I guess I'm saying, I don't know that I wanna regulate.
can you say premises or public service, or is that too broad?
Slippery slope.
Because off premises,
Did you say public service?
Ah, I was getting something in for one grocery store.
means been going on too long.
And I can tell you that this was probably similar to the definition that was in our existing code, so we did not benchmark this, but I'd be happy to take a look at
I'm
it.
putting it out
And
there.
again, we've got to benchmark it against the ones that are constitutional now, which are
Yes.
very few.
Right.
But we could take a look at that.
It's just, again, if you've got 3 or 4 people that are like, what's Lumpkin's talking about, don't waste your time. But
I've got a model ordinance, Chesterfield Norfolk, at least, that are good in different.
I just, yeah,
So.
I read that as to like, we could start saying, oh, what? And if the concern is a giant billboard, then I'd rather craft it differently. So you have to have a CUP for any sign. Where, and again, I know it's in here.
The CUP for any sign?
Except 15-5.
Oh, okay. Well, no, I mean,
Commercial, industrial, and.
no, you don't need,
Yeah,
maybe I
except-
misunderstood your question. I thought you were talking about.
15-415, signs not requiring a permit.
You
Every
need a
other-
sign permit, not a CUP.
We need those today.
Yes.
Yes, it's like a
SP,
building
not a
permit,
CUP.
once you're larger than a piece of plywood.
I think I misunderstood your question. I thought you were asking me electronic message boards. We're saying that's a CUP, and that would be a $750 fee. But any of the signs that are listed in your chart in 421, those would just be a building permit or an electrical permit, and it generally, based on the size of the sign, between $30 and $50 generally for those permits. So
Okay, no, thank you.
I misinterpreted your question.
Ken, did you have a?
My thought was, the fire stations, if they put Amber Alerts, that is,
Right.
pertains to public safety, which is their thing.
Right.
But perhaps other anyway, it would get at least the carve out for public safety locations could have a public safety alert, but see it do. Are the private, is the private sector able to provide public service is a question, I guess, not a statement.
They say Happy 4th of July, it's not an issue.
Fire fireworks at Publix.
Well, we had a big discussion of on premises and off premises at the last work session, because the reality is the Bethlehem Walk signs aren't allowed to be anywhere except for on the Bethlehem Walk property, and the Fieldhead Days of the Past signs can't be anywhere except for on that property. And after somewhat lengthy, I wasn't watching the clock discussion, you guys decided to leave it as is because it doesn't appear to be providing a enforcement issue. Those signs do appear in other places, but you don't get complaints, and so you're not telling somebody to take them down. And so rather than jump into all that you would have to do to try and allow, without talking about content, off-premises signs in certain situations, you decided to go with what we have today, because it ain't broke. But that's just, it is it can be done, but it is a complex to try and allow some off-premises signs, like the ones I just discussed, and not others, and not have it be content-based. Used to be you let, like, real estate, open house signs, yard sale signs, used to actually allow those off-premises. You can't use those categories anymore, so.
So in your definitions in 15-412, rather, it says electronic message center. And so I scroll down and look at electronic message center in 416, and then it says electronic message board signs. You gonna fix that? Okay. All right.
Just gonna be electronic messages.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand. What is the timing that we land on? You said a minute, change every minute?
So if you go to display, B, it's B1, messages cannot change more than once every,
minute.
right.
Did you all get I think we all got a letter. It was addressed to you. We all got copied on it, where it sounded like a church in the community was like saying, look at surrounding counties. There are a bunch more being liberal or whatever you want to
I
say.
didn't mean to interrupt you, but I do want to point out something. So if you go to that paragraph under 416, it says the following standards are required unless waived by the Board of Supervisors through a CUP. So
people-
if you were these are the standards that staff would recommend, but through the CUP process, if you wanted to look at the intervals of something's changed, you can do that.
Understood. But the applicant would ask for that, I suppose.
Correct.
Are there,
And that
is there
way we-
special exceptions? Is that what you would call a special exception?
No, the board has the right to make a change to any of these standards, and we can look at the speed limit and things
we're not,
like that.
We're not gonna charge the applicant more to
No,
accept
absolutely not,
anything.
it's just through the CP process.
Now, brightness controls, illumination from signs shall not exceed half a foot candle above ambient lighting at any property line. So that means that a sign is going to have the ability to change brightness,
They all do,
correct?
they tend to.
They all do?
They tend to all.
They all
Dimmer
do.
switches.
They have a sensor.
They have sensors.
Light sensor.
I've learned that that's also required of towers. It gotta change from bright white to red at night.
Okay, all right, well, that's all good. Signs, I think we're where we want to be. Can I, just definitions?
Mhm.
You have motor vehicle defined a couple of places. It's on page 87 of our packet in section 15-286.
I'm getting there.
What was the section again?
15-286.
That motor vehicle versus automobile is one of the things I know I have enough work to do.
That might help me, because we use automobile an awful lot. In 15-86, we define motor vehicle, 15-86.
15-286.
15-286.
Yep.
Motor vehicle is defined.
Yes,
It's
under.
referred to 46.2-100, right?
Right, under inoperable vehicles, yes.
There it is. Motor vehicle is defined as 46.2-100. I would just, again, Tara can be all over this, but, well, that's one place. So then let me tell you where the other place where it's defined is on page 194 of our packet, or Article 331.
Okay.
And let me find that real quick.
It's motor vehicle in the definitions.
Yeah, I'm just having trouble getting to it.
And it just, while he's looking for that, let know the board, Tara and I have been dealing sort of with the substantive changes. We're both going to go through a proofreading. Jamie, who's not familiar with the ordinance, has this third set of eyes, is gonna go through it as well. We're gonna be checking for typos, spelling, making sure section numbers, do all that. So that's what the next month will entail, but we will be doing a thorough check. And that has been on Tara and I's topic for a long time, is the difference between automobile and motor
Good,
vehicle.
good.
Yes.
And
Thank you,
making
thank you.
sure,
You'll
so.
just take a look at it, because when you
Yeah.
have it defined in 51, it doesn't refer back to 46.2.
Right.
And also, I would say, I always resist, you have motor vehicle, then you start out, the second word in the definition is vehicle. I always just automatically cringe when I see that. But in the Virginia code, they do it the same way.
I
But,
think we use the
but,
Virginia
but
code
they
definition.
define vehicle in the Virginia code. But look at that definition, because it's different. The definition of vehicle in the Virginia code is different than what I think you want our definition to be. But I pull all that together because I want us to, when the next time we have screening requirements, the no vehicle, no automobile, whatever, I would love to have it clear, like what we're talking about in terms of screening your automobile, or you can store automobiles there or store motor vehicles there.
Right.
If we're gonna distinguish, an automobile and motor vehicle appear a lot in here.
That must be a lawyer thing, because that's one of Tara's been on this one too, so.
Well, it always comes down, a lot of times it is words
Right.
and definitions when people are saying, I wanna be able to do this one. The
Words
words
and
are where we're
meaning.
gonna have to.
Yeah.
So land sales office, where you have that defined, it refers back to the land sales office on page 192. It says, it's a small structure of attractive design. I like that. Who gets to judge that? Or portion of a structure used for displaying and selling lots from land. The use must meet the requirements of section 15-286. I was trying to jump back to 15-286 and see what that meant. I did.
That would be the use standards.
That's what the use standard is?
Yeah.
I was struggling to
It
understand that.
might have changed. I'm not seeing it in 286. I think it's down to 287.
Ah, thank you.
And like I said, that's one of the
Yeah.
changes.
Those are the little things like that.
Yep.
And let me say to you, board members as well, I think I've mentioned this once before, but even upon your request to approve the ordinance, which we hope will occur at your November board meeting, I'm still asking for approval of it in some substance, and that continued, not substantive changes, but continued typographical or references like this that might be wrong, will continue to be made all the way until the time it's actually effective, so.
Okay.
Anyway, land sales office took it to 287.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Good,
You're allowed to-
or better?
I don't
That's a
know.
whole different-
Our attorney
Am I
never
feeling
feel
better than I was when we started? No, I'm good. I'm good. I appreciate the hard work.
So I have a question. You mentioned, did we advertise this for hearing on November at our last meeting? Or do we need to do that tonight?
A request to set is not a legal requirement.
Uh-huh.
It has been our intention to put this to your November public hearing. If you choose to make a motion to do so today, I believe
We
that
have time
we're in
to-
public
Do we have
session.
time?
It'll
Yes,
go
it'll
with the
be
rest of the
advertised.
public hearing
Yeah.
items.
Okay,
So-
so, do we have a motion to set the public hearing on November 6th?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion, we have a second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Oh, here's Susan. All right, so.
Great, thank you.
I wanted to open it to public comment. I think we do need to take a quick break, but yes.
This is very quick. I would just ask with the electronic message boards, if there could be some kind of a mechanism so they're not too close together, because if they are, they lose their efficacy and they just become visual clutter. Only comment.
Yes,
But
is
thanks
there a
for
way
all
to,
your hard work.
a way to restrict them based on how many others are in the area?
And maybe that's not an
Thanks.
issue because of the expense and all the other stuff, but
Well, just about.
thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Moore?
I just have a clarification or something about the auxiliary apartments.
Mhm.
If you already have a garage that's already built, that already has an upstairs that is eligible to have an auxiliary apartment at a future date for a disabled member, do you have to go through all this stuff to move that individual in at a later date? I'm not saying like tomorrow, but I mean, if a situation happens.
Well, under the current standards, right now, without this ordinance, you would require a CUP.
Okay.
So you don't have a by right use to do it today.
And with the proposed ordinance,
But
it
it's
would
a
require.
separate, it's a detached,
Yeah, it's
not.
detached.
It's
so
detached,
it's
so it
still
would
detached, so
still-
it's still required.
It does not, and I think that's what we were trying to avoid last time. It's just a question of how do you manage it, how do you know, how do you,
But if it doesn't have a kitchen in it, I can move him in?
you can move him into the bay with a car. If you wanted to.
I'm just trying to not be illegal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you can get somebody to arrest me.
Right, no.
Is he getting upstairs?
Yeah, that's the
Elevator.
one car.
No kitchen. Seems to me the way I read it, no kitchen.
No kitchen. Well.
Right, and no kitchen doesn't mean you can't have a microwave and a sink.
And hot plate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you look at dwelling unit.
Well, it's a little burners.
Okay.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you, Ms. Moore. Thank you, Sandy. We still have one more topic to discuss.
Two.
Two more,
One in
but one
open
is
session.
open and the other one is closed. Y'all wanna take a quick break before we go to the next one? Or quick
Before you
break?
get back, before you.
Yeah.
5 to 7 minutes.
What's the
5
next
minutes.
item?
But
We are still in the process of finalizing some of the contractual terms and the final dollar amount. But we're asking for your authority Should we be able to come to a resolution that you give the county attorney authority to draft a final contract and give myself signatory authority. If not, we would have to wait until the November meeting when we're a little bit further along, and hate to lose that construction period. And so what you have is close to format documents, but we have some efforts, quite honestly, to be done between now and when we would finalize this.
Yeah, documents actually were not attached to this item.
Okay.
We have close to, final documents, but we did not attach of the different sets. Given that request 2 asks your permission to either do the document that's tri-party, or if necessary, to do the construction agreement with Oregon alone, depending upon which way the negotiations go for the first one.
We have a follow-up on Wednesday with Selective. We believe we are close on terms. Again, I didn't want to call a special meeting or put this off till November. 3 weeks of construction time before winter hits is critical to this project.
Yep.
Question? I'm sorry.
The appropriation number in number 1 is the amount that we expect right now today with us and Selective to complete the contract. Your 3rd request says if we actually end up being able to settle all of the issues with Selective, they would end up paying us more than the 1-1, and it simply allows the flexibility to allow John to also appropriate that. If there is more money from Selective, can we please appropriate it to this project? So it's limited to whatever money we get from Selective, but it does have that flexibility if they end up paying us more for one or 2 different reasons that they might. Can that also be appropriated to the project? Still comes to the county from the performance bond on the animal shelters.
So if I may, Mr. Chairman, liquidated damages could be part of that?
A couple of the reasons why that amount would change would be that we can still negotiate a settlement as it relates to some of the liquidated damages.
My only question is, why would we want to appropriate LD to this project?
Because we've used our own contingency to pay for portions of expenditures that would reimburse us for, and it would allow us to have that money, any balance left in the contingency of this project.
So your intention is that any liquidated damages that Selective would agree to pay just through this process, you're only going to just make us whole from other monies that we didn't originally plan to spend?
And again, not knowing what that final dollar amount is, we have an amount we've already expended, we have an amount that we've projected. Should we exceed that, we would have additional funds in contingency. Remember, the project is also going up $1 million. And so that's $1 million that we're not paying for as a locality, but we do need to be prepared that if something comes in as a change order, those funds in excess of our planned expenditures would have to cover any of those kinds of change orders. So there's not an excess amount of funds in any view of the settlements we've been discussing.
Also,
Am I answering the question?
let me just
Yeah,
clarify.
you're
When we say
that's-
liquidated damages, there are 2 elements that may fall under that. One is extended professional costs, some of which we have already spent and we certainly will incur. The other piece is a literal daily amount.
And I was
for all
thinking
else.
of the daily amount,
I
which
think
I
you
think
were.
in theory should be above, what, I just,
Yeah.
if we're talking about daily damages, I didn't want to automatically say, put it into the project. If there was an explanation of why we need to do so.
No, it's a fair question. If we were talking about the full amount, which we may at some point if we can't get to that agreement, then we would have an excess that we may not need to appropriate. My guess is we will be fighting on that on the back end, and not know what that, number actually is until we would reach some kind of settlement or legal ruling.
I think it's fair to say the current negotiations with Selective have been around numbers that would really just cover costs.
As expected.
Yes, and that any greater amount from them, perhaps if
Is Selective's exposure increasing as time goes on because of the non-completion? Is their exposure increasing? Do they have an incentive to try and draw this to a close?
Yes, that is one of the areas of contention. There is the fees that Tara just mentioned are continuing to accrue, if you will.
Correct.
Certainly they have debated those costs with us, but it's in, you know, I would think it's as much in their interest as ours to get this done sooner than later.
Okay. Because I'm kind of getting into negotiations a little bit here and what leverage you have and don't have to try and resolve this. I think we all want to resolve it. One of my concerns might be that if we, under one or more of these requests, if we say, you know, let's just go to Oregon, sign a contract, get the thing finished, and we'll deal with them later, completely taking them off the hook, you losing your leverage, they drag it out for years. As opposed to, let's negotiate with them with all appropriate vigor, get what you think is the best possible for the counties. Then once that's settled out, then we figure out from there what to do with, if there is any gap, you know, how to fill the gap. So, if, again, they're accruing additional exposure, and if we haven't agreed to take on the project and finish it, so that they're not off the hook, if you will. I mean, I want to give you what
Sure.
you need to go, negotiate here.
I think we have that in either of these scenarios, because if we actually issue the contract ourselves, we're going after them for everything. I mean, I don't want to talk legally, strategy-wise.
But, yeah, I mean, they may view, look, you know, you took, I don't want to, you know, from a legal standpoint, look, you guys took this on yourself, you finished it off yourself, you're showing a willingness, you know, to accept additional exposure. I don't want to give them any, anyway, I want to have you equipped with all the tools and leverage you can going into this negotiation, and if there is pressure building on them, not to relieve that until we get this resolved in the appropriate fashion, legal fashion. So
We've been negotiating since shortly after August 20th, maybe it was early September when we got their offer. Probably the biggest pressure now, which we did discuss in 2x2s or phone calls with you all, is we need Oregon not to step off this job.
Understand. Yes.
And so that, I think, collectively the board has agreed is a priority.
Sure, so we
And
don't
so-
negotiate forever, right? You gotta get that.
And that's why this item is before you today. We think, you know, it's not done, but we've reached a point where we think it's not right for us to wait 3 more weeks before we have the permission to go one way or the other. If you approve today for us to go one way or the other, we'll finish the negotiations, but we feel that the pressures are building, that we will take one of those steps within the next 3 weeks, which is why we're not waiting for your regular meeting in November, and why we're asking for more flexibility than we've ever asked for before.
So the concern is if, even if Selective is negotiating in good faith, if they just drag it out, at some point, you may want to switch gears and focus on one of your
Getting it
other.
done.
And that's request part 2, right?
Yes, it's
Request
2,
That's
the
after
second
the
part
or.
of 2,
That's
Not
yeah.
after
just-
the or.
Again, I'm just thinking how that might change the dynamic of the negotiation, that's all. And
I
what
don't
your
want to
sense of
complicate
is.
it, but there is, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, theoretically, they can come to us and tell us to finish. It's not in either of our interests to take that approach, I don't believe. And in good faith, they've been negotiating, we have another follow-up on Wednesday. I just want to be in a position to pull a trigger on an agreement without having to wait 3 more weeks.
Okay, so just to clarify the 2, it sounds like you want to be able to go either way depending on how the negotiations go. Could you give me a sense for what the county potentially could be on the hook for in either of those scenarios? Or what, I know you don't have final numbers now, because you don't know how the negotiations are going to settle out. But as it stands today, I guess they've made some offer, right? Tender and completion offer. Under what we know today, if you will.
The primary contract with Oregon would be covered per their contract amount. So what's not covered is the balance. we've identified 2 outstanding issues, one of which is a Dominion power line that was not buried to a certain depth and needs to be resolved, as well as the cost for Horgan from the interim agreement to the whatever date we execute this contract. And then the balance is the amount we've spent to date, which is about $108,000. And that's in our current contingency. Our current contingency is down to about $60,000, give or take. So if we exceed the balance of our contingency, that's the additional county exposure that we'd have to come back and there is a possibility we'd ask you to do that, but we know if and when we go to sue or negotiate, whatever that is, we feel that we're eligible for numbers that far exceed what we have out of pocket to date. And almost, to give you some perspective, we think that LDs could potentially be in excess of 600,000. Our current exposure is, that 108 outside of the Horgan contract. So we're trying to figure out how do we close that delta. And so I think our exposure today is minimum, especially if we get the balance to pay Horgan in full. It is that amount that we've already expended and potential changes from here to the end of the project.
Okay, so let me see if I got that. What we have remaining in our account, plus what they've put on the table, would cover the Horgan completion from here forward.
Correct.
But it doesn't cover a couple of other items.
Our project management and our architectural fees.
And the gap. And the
Yes.
gap, and the gap from August 20th.
Correct.
And I think it's a fair
potential to be
statement,
moved.
that that's about 275, that we think our professional fees are 240.
240.
Oregon might be 30, Dominion Power might be 5, and the total of those are 275. Is that fair?
Yes.
So I guess it's request 1, right, to
Request 1 is the appropriation.
appropriate the 1-1.
Then if we have to, under request 2, sign the first agreement as it's written today, they're only paying the 1-1. And that's where the gap of 275 comes, okay?
So the
But-
1-1 is from selective,
Right?
and the whatever it is left in our account.
1-3 we
Combined
have.
gets you to the 2408, which is Horgan's contract.
Right.
So we have the money either in hand or offered from selective. In the combination, we have the 2 combined is enough to cover the contract and finish the project. But we have the open issues, which is the potential exposure of about
Right.
275.
The reason we've, then under request 3 is where we're in negotiations to try and get at least the 275 that would cover those costs we've identified. The other possibility is under the second half of 2, if for some reasons things go completely awry with selective and they pull their 1-1, which hasn't happened, but we're asking for permission to execute with Oregon. And that means we're appropriating the 1-1 with only the potential to cut it back in the future. It's not the way negotiations have been going, but that possibility is there.
So request 2, you're seeking authority to either take what's on the table, finish the contract, and then continue to pursue, or at that point it goes away. If we take what's on the table, the tender and completion, if we take that, can we still pursue the other, or is that off the table at that point? I mean, if I'm making myself
An
clear,
option
maybe
1?
not.
No, he's saying if we do
In the tender,
two first bullet,
the
do we
tender
lose everything
and
else?
completion agreement allows us to still negotiate over the
It
other
does.
items.
We have to, because the numbers are the same in both the first and second bullet, so there's a gap. Is there a scenario you would, excuse me, Ken, bring it up, but I guess what you're asking, is there a scenario where we resolve it all, including anything else from additional from selective, and they wash their hands and say, it's yours and
That's
Morgan's
number 3.
project?
Request 3, what we're still negotiating is that they might pay us more than the 1-1 to cover the other costs.
That's
Which is
still
the
negotiating.
global agreement we're seeking now.
Yes.
But if we don't get to a global resolution,
So
Take the partial resolution.
3 could subsume 2 then, it seems to me.
3 would be the tender and completion agreement, plus they're paying us 270 something,
Or whatever,
something,
whatever.
whatever that number is.
If they
And
agree to
so
it.
based on that, we're resolving all issues and not leaving anything out.
Okay.
That's why we don't have a number assigned with 3. We have been asking for more than just the solo 1-1, and if we get it, but again, that's for more cost-based, not the full.
Okay, board action request. Try to get my hands on the ask, what staff is asking. Board action request, you're requesting all 3 of these items?
The flexibility to
One to be able,
resolve on the.
one to appropriate our remaining balance, 2 to accept the tender and completion and go to Oregon and sign the completion agreement with Oregon.
Those are or. Tender and completion is a 3-party agreement, or if we have to for us to contract independently with Oregon.
So it's a tender completion, the only difference is it brings selective into that agreement as opposed to just us and Oregon. Okay, so we either do a 3-way or a 2-way, but, so the request 1 is to be able to appropriate what we have left, 2 is to either do a 2-way or 3-way, but get Oregon contracted and off and running.
Yes.
And then number 3 is to allow you to continue to pursue the additional items.
Yes, that if we are able to get the additional funding from Selective in the next few weeks, that's that continuation of negotiations, we also can appropriate that money to the project.
So if you're successful, if you sign the contract, Oregon's off and running, you continue to take a run at Selective, and they go, okay, fine, here's $275, but you can go ahead and appropriate those or move those into the project as well to reimburse us for our
Not to confuse you anymore, that could be an amended number 1 by the time we're done with this, and we never end up with the second phase. We get 1 agreement, but we're not there yet.
It could be part of the first part of request 2, just a 3-way global settlement,
Yes, a slightly higher amount.
which is the preferred, but we don't know if we can get there. But we don't want to lose Oregon again. Okay. And they shouldn't want to lose it either, by the way, because if they're accruing liability, Oregon goes away, they're going to accrue a lot more liability.
I would think it's in all our interest.
Yeah. So the request is for all 3 of those items.
Yes, including the alternatives under 2, for board permission to select under those 2.
Okay. Is it, should these or do these need to be considered separately or together? Is it a matter of procedure?
I typically prefer that one agenda item go through as a yes or no. If there's something within it that you want to deny, you would say the motion is to not to allow request 1, but to allow 2 and 3. You know, to approve 2 and 3. If you have a different way to act on the 3 requests, or you could just approve them all. Just say, rather than separate motions.
And just part of this completion is because the total cost of completion is higher than the original bid by some significant amount.
Over 1.1 million.
And that's been largely picked up by Selective.
Yes.
I will nominate. That's all I have, Mr. Chair. I'll yield back my time for right now.
You used to bully it on the way.
You have
Well, I think the yellow light's flashing over here.
Mr. Badesky, how would you, what would be, not looking for a long reaction, but what would be your kind of gut reaction if we made a motion, and in number 3, where you said to cover any of these costs? How would it be if we said to cover at least 75% of these costs?
As this is a public meeting and we're having a discussion about a public negotiation that's not over, I wouldn't put a cap on it.
Okay.
And the request is to allow to whatever money comes in.
It's the type of cost, not the actual dollar amount.
Right.
Is that?
No, I think what we're giving here is authority for you to just settle it up with Selective, whether it's a penny on the dollar or 100%.
It is consistent with what we've discussed prior.
And the request is to be able to appropriate those funds
When they come in.
when they come in. If and when
Well,
they
but
come in.
it necessarily includes the authority to just settle the matter.
As well. Settle it, receive the funds and
Settle it,
appropriate.
receive the funds and appropriate.
Yep.
Okay. Yep, I was a little wary of the negotiation piece, but I was just kind of, Mr. Peterson was talking about, giving you the tools you need.
I'm always grateful. This is, 99.9% of the time, both myself and your county attorney would never bring this to you like this. This is a unique situation, and we're your procurement agent. And so this is just one of those ones that if we wait 3 more weeks, we lose a critical building time.
But number 3 is not as time sensitive, is it?
It's not tied to the Oregon contract necessarily,
If-
unless you do a global.
If we don't reach an agreement for additional money in the next few weeks, then we will have, under the agreement we will sign with Selective, the right to negotiate and litigate out all the rest of the issues. And that's the only reason I put next several weeks in there is because we would not presume that several months from now that you will have appropriated those funds. That would be brought back before you for any appropriation of funds.
Fair-
It's
fair
only
enough.
if it's in this next short period of time.
Fair enough, that's good, thank you.
Yes, that's why I put the time frame in there, because we end up litigating out issues and get some funds in the past.
Then the
which would
board's
be-
gonna be brought back in.
Then the
and
board,
all
then
that.
those are not appropriated by this
I
action.
mean, actually, if it was passed next week, you could almost bring it to the board in November.
Mr. Chairman, I move that, the board approve the request as presented, that we appropriate 1.135,250.12 funds to fully fund Oregon's proposal to complete the animal shelter construction. And that we further authorize the county administrator to execute, one of 2 possible agreements, either a tender and completion agreement with Selective's insurance company and Oregon Construction for the completion of the animal shelter in an amount not to exceed 2.408,632.10, or that the county administrator execute a construction contract with Oregon for the completion of the animal shelter in that same amount. And that further the board authorize and direct the county administrator to continue negotiating with Selective, and that if in the next several, let's say in the next 3 weeks, Selective agrees to increase the amount of its payment to cover any of the costs, additional costs for architect, project management, cost to repairs, to deficient work, and do you want me to include liquidated damages in there?
It's not inappropriate.
Okay, liquidated damages, that the county administrator be authorized to agree to that and settle the matter with Selective and appropriate the additional funds that are needed, of any funds that are recovered, the additional funds that are needed to the animal shelter project.
Not sure I understand the motion. Can you do that again? Just kidding.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Can you repeat it all?
Maybe we should
Sorry,
go
Bottom line
Mr.
is-
Peterson.
What motion are you seconding about?
Just-
Yeah, all of it.
All of it, yeah.
And just point of clarification, this is all as presented in the package?
Uh-huh.
He did.
It's all as presented in the package. So
He
there's,
said as presented, then he read it all.
I read it along, I did say 3 weeks, in the next 3 weeks.
but you're not modifying anything that's, presented to us.
I read it verbatim, I thought.
We have a motion, we have a second. Mr. Bureski, would you do a roll call vote?
Mr. Minnick?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Lumpkin?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes. All right, next on the agenda is a closed session.
There